Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nicholas Billingham. Fiona Beal was a kind and friendly woman who was devoted to her job and adored by her students. She lived with her partner, 42-year-old Nicholas Billingham, in Northampton, a large town in England. Fiona and Nicholas had been together for 17 years and, like many couples, they experienced their share of highs and lows. Leslie, a friend of them, described them as content. Leslie recalled that she had thought Fiona was really nice. Leslie mentioned that they hadn't displayed overt affection but seemed happy. Nicholas's history with women suggested that his relationships were often short-lived. His relationship with Fiona ended abruptly in November 2021, but it wasn't due to the usual reasons. The breakup occurred after they were required to isolate themselves for 10 days. After the breakup, Nicholas maintained contact with his friends and family, revealing to his mother that he had left with a woman named Faye and was happy with his new life. Meanwhile, Fiona completed her 10-day isolation period, recovered, and eventually returned to work. She received supportive messages from her colleagues when she returned to work. However, the split had a lasting impact on her. By the end of February 2022, nearly 4 months after the breakup, her mental health began to decline significantly. The memories of Nicholas in her Northampton home became overwhelming, so she decided to move to Cumbria, a 200-mile distance from her previous home. On March 15, 2022, her family grew concerned after reading her text messages. Their worry prompted them to contact the police. The police found Fiona severely injured in a bath at her Lake District Lodge rental. Officer Josh Parkin testified in court that when he arrived, ominous music was playing from her phone, and he initially thought she was dead. Parkin described the scene, stating that he had found a completely naked female lying in the bath. Music was playing from a mobile phone next to her. He immediately called for an ambulance and suggested they try to get her out of the bath to administer CPR. She then became partially conscious. To check her responsiveness, he had pulled her ear firmly, and she had moaned, trying to turn over. They had sat her up, and she had become emotional. Parkin had discovered a blue leather-bound notebook with a logo on the front. A quick glance had revealed it was a personal document detailing her mental health struggles at the time. Fiona's notebook revealed a dark history of abuse and a sinister plot. She wrote about her husband Nicholas's cruel behavior, including spitting on her and threatening her during intimate contact. She started planning her revenge as Tulip 22, a reckless and ruthless alter ego. Fiona described how she planned and executed the murder, using a knife and an eye mask to carry out the crime. She hid the body in the bathroom and later moved it to the garden, where it was buried under multiple layers of materials. The police initially dismissed Fiona's notebook as ramblings, but upon re-examining it, they found disturbing details that led them to investigate further. They searched Fiona's house and found a blood-stained mattress in the cellar. On March 19th, forensic officers and a cadaver dog discovered Nicholas's remains in the garden, wrapped in carpet and buried under various materials. Fiona's notebook revealed her regret and apology for the crime, but also her anger and hurt towards her husband. The body was found with a sleep mask covering the eyes, bearing the phrase, "This is my morning after" face on the inside. The police spokesman described the scene as showing utter contempt, as the body was wrapped in cables, hose pipes, and plastic bags, mixed with debris from a building. An autopsy was conducted the day after the discovery. The results confirmed that the cause of death was a single stab wound to the right side of the neck, damaging the right jugular vein, esophagus, and trachea. The injury was inflicted with moderate force. Following the investigation, police arrested Fiona Beal on March 22, 2022, charging her with the murder of Nicholas Billingham. Nicholas's family was shocked and heartbroken when they learned of his death, particularly after discovering that Fiona had sent texts to them and Nicholas's friends from his own phone. Following the police investigation into Nicholas' death on November 1, 2021, it was discovered that Fiona attempted to cover her tracks in the days that followed. As part of her plan, Fiona claimed to infection, which would have given her a 10-day period of isolation, during which she would not be disturbed. Fiona's actions during this 10-day period were inconsistent with the severe symptoms she claimed to be experiencing due to the infection. On November 2nd, with Fiona using Nicholas's Amazon account, and later her own, to purchase various cleaning supplies, including products for Venetian blinds, a new mop and bucket, heavy-duty trash bags, a new mattress, bedding, clothing, wall art, and mirrors. Later that day, Fiona made changes to her order, adding 3 rolls of duct tape to a delivery that already included multiple cleaning products. She also made a separate purchase at 2:19 p.m., buying heavy-duty gardening gloves, a stainless steel digging spade, and a garden incinerator. These items would later be used to dispose of a body. Nearly 2 weeks after Nicholas's death, Fiona went shopping again. On November 13th, supermarket cameras caught her buying various items, including building materials that she would later use to construct a grave. The police released the CCTV footage of this shopping trip. Fiona also impersonated Nicholas by sending texts to his family and friends for several months. She even invited Nicholas's mother to visit her at home. Nicholas's mother, Miss Valentine, reported that Fiona had invited her over for a Christmas drink on December 23, 2021. Unbeknownst to Miss Valentine, her son's body was buried in Fiona's back garden at the time. Fiona Beal appeared to be living a normal life, showing no signs of depression or trauma after the incident. During the trial, Fiona initially denied any wrongdoing but later admitted to taking Nicholas's life, claiming it was an involuntary act. However, the prosecutor disagreed with her account. He presented evidence that Nicholas had been unfaithful to Fiona throughout their 17-year relationship, cheating on her with multiple women. Despite Nicholas's infidelity, Fiona had taken him back on multiple occasions. The prosecutor revealed that one of Nicholas's affairs had resulted in a child. Instead of leaving Nicholas, Fiona allegedly planned and executed murder, carefully considering how to kill him, dispose of his body, and cover her tracks. She also prepared explanations for his disappearance and her own absence from work on the day of the crime. Defense attorney Andrew Wheeler addressed the jury after the prosecution's opening argument, stating that Fiona had struggled with her mental health for years due to Nicholas Billingham's controlling behavior. He emphasized that Fiona, a 49-year-old woman with a good reputation, was a hardworking and well-liked school teacher who had been in a 17-year partnership with the victim. Wheeler asked the jury to consider how someone with Fiona's good character could commit such a crime. Wheeler stressed that the key issue in the case was her state of mind at the time of the killing. Wheeler explained that Fiona had struggled with her mental health for years and suggested that Nicholas Billingham's psychologically dominating behavior had gradually worn her down. Fiona Beal admitted her wrongdoing. She then shared details about her personal life and relationship with Nicholas at Northampton Crown Court. Fiona revealed that she had been prescribed antidepressants during her university years. She described Nicholas as caring and attentive at the start of their relationship, but claimed he gradually changed over time. Fiona alleged that Billingham's behavior became increasingly controlling, particularly when it came to cleaning. She recalled an incident where she had left a cloth with cleaner on it, which stained a worktop. Although it seemed minor at first, cleaning became a major issue throughout their relationship. Instead of laughing off mistakes, Fiona said she would get scolded by Billingham. She also described how meal times became rigid and inflexible, with everything having to be exactly as Nicholas wanted it. Over time, this behavior escalated and continued until the end of their relationship. Even small things, like the way items were placed in cupboards, became a point of contention, with Nicholas insisting that they face outwards. Fiona testified that Nicholas's behavior escalated from joking insults to cruel comments, which made her lose confidence. She also shared that before taking Nicholas's life, she warned him that she would kill him if he ever treated another woman the way he treated her. The judge stated that considering the severity of the crime, he sentenced Fiona to a minimum of 20 years in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Stephanie Scott, 26 years old, was kind, intelligent, and always smiling. From childhood, she was curious and active, participating in school clubs and sports. As an adult, she followed in her father Robert's footsteps as a teacher, sharing his passion for education. She taught English and drama at Leon High School, taking great pride in her work. Stephanie and Aaron knew each other from a young age. They spent time together, shared interests, and played sports in their hometown. They were close friends until Aaron turned 21, when their relationship blossomed into romance. In early April 2015, Stephanie and Aaron were busily preparing for their wedding scheduled for the 11th. Stephanie, a perfectionist, had spent months meticulously planning every detail. Almost everything was ready, with arrangements set and a honeymoon booked in Tahiti. She had recently celebrated her party. The only remaining task was to rehearse their first dance, for which they had taken many lessons. The first weekend of April reminded them that their eagerly awaited day was almost upon them. Aaron invited Stephanie to join him at a party out of town, but she declined to finish some remaining tasks, including finalizing plans for her students during her honeymoon absence. On Easter Sunday, April 5th, around 11 a.m., Stephanie Scott made her way to her school in Leon, New South Wales, to deliver some work to a deputy teacher. She parked her car on the street and to meet a colleague who lived nearby. Together, they opened the school gates and entered. Stephanie then locked the gates behind them and, with keys in hand, proceeded to the English teacher's office. There, she sent an email to a bus company confirming transportation arrangements for her wedding guests. After working for a couple more hours and feeling joyful that all her tasks were completed successfully, Stephanie left the administrative building and walked towards the gates. Aaron, aware that Stephanie had left and would be away for a few hours, grew worried as the evening approached. He had texted her the day before and received prompt replies. However, on April 5th, he got no response from Stephanie. Returning home after 7 p.m., Aaron found that Stephanie was still not back and her car was absent from the street. Managing his anxiety, he reasoned perhaps the stress of the upcoming wedding and leaving her students for an extended period had exhausted Stephanie. Maybe she wanted some alone time. Yet such complete silence was out of character for her. Even amidst wedding planning excitement, Stephanie had been eagerly sharing details about her dress and the wedding menu. She didn't appear nervous or depressed, but rather excited and ready for her big day. With his concern growing and unable to sleep, Aaron texted Stephanie again in the morning before calling her family. More than a day had passed since Stephanie's disappearance when Aaron went to the Leon police station to report his missing fiancée. The police inspected the vicinity and noted that Stephanie's car was missing too. They speculated she might have left the school and been involved in an accident or gotten stuck in a ditch or creek. Helicopters were deployed to search, while ground police headed straight to Leon High School, the last known location of Stephanie. Due to Easter Sunday and few people at the school, there were few witnesses, complicating matters further. The police conducted a thorough investigation, which included ruling out hundreds of potential suspects. A check of the school's alarm system in Stephanie's classroom revealed that she had deactivated it at 1:30 p.m. and reactivated it at 1:38 p.m. This provided the police with a precise time frame, indicating when Stephanie was in close proximity to the classroom. However, it was the only detail they could ascertain. Detectives attempted to use phone tracking, but Stephanie's mobile phone had been turned off. The last activities on her bank accounts and social media were recorded on Saturday, April 4th. Local news broadcasts began covering the story by April 7th, as hundreds in the small community of Eagle sought any information about Stephanie. This behavior was completely uncharacteristic of her, and as each day passed with her wedding approaching, hope began to fade. Stephanie's mother, Marilyn, stated that if her daughter was not found within the next few hours, it likely meant something terrible had happened. A reporter from a local newspaper in Lyon reported that police resumed searching the school. They spent most of the day using digital mapping technology to study the school's premises and specifically marked the room where Stephanie worked on the day of her disappearance. A witness near Lyon High School on Easter Sunday mentioned hearing strange noises around 2 p.m., like rustling and dragging something on the ground. He recalled seeing Stephanie's car under a covered walkway, but didn't think much of it at the time. Later, her car disappeared. Another witness, a school employee, told detectives about an odd conversation he had with one of the school's cleaners the morning after Stephanie's disappearance. Amidst rumors and anxious talk about the missing girl, this witness asked the cleaner when he last saw Stephanie. The cleaner replied that he hadn't seen her on the day she disappeared. Additionally, this witness noticed that the cleaner's face bore scratches. The police decided to question him further regarding these findings. For additional information, this was 24-year-old Vincent Stanford. Detectives had a brief conversation with Vincent, who explained that he stopped by the school to take out the garbage bins. Although he wasn't scheduled to work that day, he claimed he was there for a short time because was in a hurry to buy groceries. Vincent asserted he did not see Stephanie at that time and wished them luck in their search. Added that he left the school after 3 p.m. to go to the store where he always shopped. However, the police contacted the store and learned it was closed on the specified date. This led authorities to believe Vincent had reasons to lie about the store, making him a suspect in the investigation. Investigators decided to conduct another thorough interrogation of Vincent and went to his home where he lived with his mother. When they arrived, Vincent was not home. His mother allowed the police to search the house, where they found a set of keys on a red and white cord matching the description of Stephanie Scott's keys. As police were collecting evidence, Vincent arrived in his car. He was immediately detained, and his car was confiscated. In the back seat, several MDF panels were found stained with what appeared to be blood. Additionally, tire tracks in front of the house did not match Vincent's vehicle. A used condom with its wrapper was also discovered in his bedroom. Detectives asked Vincent where he had been on that day. Pointing to a camera on the front passenger seat, he said he was taking photos. When asked if they could view the camera, Vincent agreed with a shrug. Upon turning on the camera, investigators saw an image of a burnt woman's corpse lying in a wooded area. Vincent attempted to explain these away as shots from a movie he had filmed as a joke. However, police quickly realized these were actual crime scene photos with Stephanie as the victim. As a result, Vincent Stanford, the cleaner at Lyon High School, was immediately arrested. His seized phone and laptop revealed numerous photos of young girls from Lyon High School and from online sources, indicating stalking behavior. Sadly, Stephanie's body had not yet been found at that time. Vincent was charged with her murder on April 9th. News of his arrest spread quickly. Vincent, 24, was detained in connection with Stephanie Scott's disappearance and presumed murder. During this time, a search team found Stephanie's car abandoned in a secluded area 8 kilometers from where she was last seen. However, her body remained missing, and the search continued. Detectives worked to identify the location where the photos with the body were taken. On April 17th, 5 days after last seeing Stephanie, another witness came forward. The witness reported seeing a car near a canal around 4 p.m. on Easter Sunday. A man got out of the car and threw an object resembling a laptop into the water before driving away. The police soon retrieved the laptop from the canal bed, confirming it belonged to Stephanie. Meanwhile, Divers continued searching for the slain school teacher's body in the New South Wales River area. Reporter Natalie Cooper discussed the ongoing search for Stephanie's body in a live broadcast. The 26-year-old school teacher's body still hadn't been found. Police scoured fields and vineyards near where her red Mazda had been found earlier that week. Police divers also explored the canal in the area, retrieving a laptop believed to be Stephanie's. Cooper mentioned a shrine near the site that many visited that morning. The entire community was deeply saddened, regardless of personal acquaintance with Stephanie. Her family and fiancé visited the shrine the previous night, lighting candles, praying, and comforting each other in their grief. The reporter also noted that police were desperately searching for any sightings of a white vehicle believed to be owned by Vincent Stanford, the suspect in Stephanie Scott's murder. Witnesses were urged to contact police immediately. Meanwhile, Vincent, while in custody, voluntarily approached detectives requesting to speak with them. He divulged all details, including information on where to find Stephanie's body. According to Vincent, on the day of the incident, Stephanie was in an upstairs teacher's room working on a computer with her office door open. Vincent was cleaning garbage bins using a pressure vacuum and needed to take some bins upstairs. That's when he noticed Stephanie. Vincent told detectives he suddenly had the urge to kill her and quickly went home to fetch his kit, which included handcuffs, Viagra, a knife, and cleaning supplies. He also searched online for information about incidents of violence involving brides en route. Upon his return, he found Stephanie packing up to leave. As she walked past him, she looked into his eyes and smiled, wishing him a happy Easter. That's when Vincent abruptly grabbed her and dragged her into a storeroom. Detectives reminded him of the scratches on his face that they had noticed during their first encounter and asked him about their origin. It turned out that some scratches were from Stephanie's microphone, while others came from her nails as she defended herself when he tried to kill her. Vincent described how he had grabbed Stephanie from behind, covered her mouth with his right hand, and encircled her waist with his left before taking her to the storeroom. He shut the door and violently threw her to the ground, hitting her repeatedly. After assaulting Stephanie, Vincent used a knife to end her life. He admitted feeling compelled to do so and confessed to harboring many brutal thoughts and schemes. He even mentioned having killed others before. He speculated about having psychological issues, clarifying that he harbored no hatred towards his victims, but simply enjoyed killing. Vincent then recalled feeling hungry and decided to go home for a sandwich and coffee, leaving Stephanie lying alone on the storeroom floor. After eating, he returned to the school, placed Stephanie's body in the trunk of her car, and drove it to his home, parking on the street. On Easter Monday, Vincent drove Stephanie's car with her body inside to a national park. There, he removed her body from the trunk and stripped it on the ground. He noticed numerous bruises and abrasions on Stephanie's face, including swelling on the right side and a bruise under her eye. He then decided to cover the body with branches and doused it with gasoline. Using a match, he ignited the fire and discarded it nearby. Vincent stayed briefly at the scene, taking several photos of Stephanie's body with his camera before waiting 5 minutes to ensure that the fire was fully ignited before leaving. He abandoned Stephanie's car on a secluded country road and walked back to town. In response to detectives' questions about his brutal treatment of Stephanie, although they knew this, Vincent continued denying such actions despite evidence indicating otherwise. As a result, he faced additional charges of aggravated harm and physical injury to a woman. Investigators inquired why, in the photographs, the woman was undressed except for a bra. Vincent explained that he usually removed almost everything, leaving only the bra. He wasn't sure why he did this, possibly wanting a souvenir. He admitted taking Stephanie's bra. Regarding her earrings and wedding ring, Vincent claimed he didn't remember when he removed them from the woman, but likely threw them in a trash bin along with other items. In fact, Vincent had removed Stephanie's wedding and graduation rings and sent them to his twin brother Marcus, who lived in Adelaide. Marcus sold the rings and earrings at a jewelry store. then destroyed Stephanie's driver's license after taking a photograph of it. A 24-year-old man was arrested at his home in the Adelaide Hills around 7 a.m. Neighbors were shocked that the next chapter in a murder case captivating the nation unfolded right on their doorstep. It was shocking and unsettling for their small street and community. Marcus Vincent's identical twin worked on a flower farm. His colleagues described him as very quiet and reserved, hardly interacting with them beyond work. During the trial, Marcus Stamford had no lawyer, and when the judge asked if there were any reasons he should not be sent to Leeton, he replied with a strong Dutch accent that he had never been there and did not need to go. However, the next morning, he was taken to Sydney under police escort and remained in custody. Stephanie's family was further devastated when the police announced a second arrest in Stephanie's case, Vincent's twin brother Marcus. Finally, the search for the missing Stephanie came to an end. In fact, while Vincent was still giving his confession, the police had already located Stephanie's body a day before her wedding date. Court events unfolded unexpectedly. At first, Vincent denied his guilt, making the proceedings uncertain. However, based on the evidence presented by the police, it was determined that the case could lead to a conviction. Psychological tests indicated that Vincent might be a serial killer and posed a significant danger. He displayed a lack of emotions and sympathy and often laughed. Several disturbing moments from his past came to light. Vincent Stamford was born in Australia, but his family moved to the Netherlands when he was 3 years old. They later returned to New South Wales when he was 7. At age 7, he dreamt of committing murder. At 12, he nearly strangled his teacher. Classmates called him a psychopath due to issues with violence and disobedience, resulting in him being sent to a behavior correction school. Vincent said he could never adapt to society and was later placed in a psychiatric center where he was diagnosed with autism and oppositional defiant disorder, ODD. After being released, he told police that he attempted to enter university or join the army, but faced rejection in both cases. Consequently, he worked various jobs before becoming a cleaner at Leon Middle School. Initially hired for 5 weeks, his contract was extended. While working at the school, he often hid in the women's restroom during student lunch breaks to watch them. When detectives examined Vincent's mobile phone, they discovered that he had stalked girls at the school and 2 other women working nearby before murdering Stephanie. Numerous photos, about 2,000, of one young girl were found on his phone. Upon careful examination of Vincent's car, stains on MDF panels confirmed Stephanie's DNA presence. Additionally, during a search of the Stamford residence, investigators discovered traces of Stephanie's blood on a knife, several condom packets, and her bra. After admitting to selling Stephanie's rings, destroying evidence, and assisting Vincent in concealing facts, Vincent's twin brother Marcus was sentenced to 15 months in prison. The judge stipulated Marcus's sentence did not allow for early parole, since no such practice exists. Marcus's sentence was specifically 1 year and 3 months for his involvement in Stephanie Scott's murder. This sentence was set to conclude on September 9, 2016. If Marcus had not entered a guilty plea, he would have faced 1 year and 8 months in prison. In October 2016, Marcus was released. Over 60 people signed a petition calling for an appeal regarding Marcus Stamford's sentence, describing it as inadequate. Following his release from prison, Marcus briefly returned to Leon with his mother. However, the local community clearly communicated that he was unwelcome there, and his current whereabouts are unknown. Since his release, Marcus has publicly apologized for his actions and claimed he would cause no further trouble. He admitted that his actions were extremely foolish and regretted being unable to change the past. Furthermore, Marcus wishes for no contact with Vincent and does not seek any relationship with him. Their father Steve expressed both confusion and fear over Vincent's actions and has no desire to communicate with him either. He categorically rules out any possibility of meeting Vincent and wants nothing to do with him. Steve stated he cannot fathom why Vincent committed these crimes and does not intend to seek an answer. On the day before Stephanie's 28th birthday, Vincent Stanford was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder and an additional 15 years for sexual violence under aggravating circumstances. Both sentences were effective from April 8, 2015. During the trial, Stephanie's mother Marilyn remarked that Vincent was incapable of coping with his own life and consequently took Stephanie's, depriving her of a chance at a happy future. They will never grasp the full extent of their daughter's suffering, but knowing she suffered is too difficult to bear. Thus, the family prefers to retreat from public attention to mourn their beloved girl and heal their grief internally. In the future, Stephanie's relatives will not respond to questions, participate in interviews, or appear on television programs. The day after the trial, the family planned a celebration of Stephanie's brief, yet remarkable life on what would have been her 28th birthday, the second birthday they've marked without her. A tea party featuring mint cookies was scheduled for 3 p.m., and Stephanie's mother invited everyone to join them. The Scott family also called for stricter screening and evaluation processes for school staff to prevent similar incidents in the future and reduce risks to students like those faced by Stephanie Scott. Tragically, more than a year after Stephanie's death, her father Robert succumbed in a bizarre accident when a tree fell on him. He was buried close to where his daughter rests. Having lost Stephanie, Aaron moved to Europe in hope of healing his pain tied to New South Wales. 5 years after losing his beloved sibling, Aaron met a new love and announced his engagement to Samantha. The community of Leeton was profoundly affected by Stephanie Scott's tragic story. She will never be forgotten. Her life's narrative has been immortalized in books. Stephanie's family hopes people will remember her remarkable qualities, her passion for teaching, helping others, and mentoring them. They believe she embodied all the good qualities of a human being and significantly impacted many lives. In her memory, her loved ones encourage everyone to be kind and strive to do good in the world. Stephanie Scott's story leaves a profound mark that inspires all who hear it to live lives filled with care for others. Dorothy Stratton, a 20-year-old model, had it all: youth allure, wealth, triumph, and a cherished partner. Dorothy was predicted to have a bright future in the limelight, but fate had different plans. Her full name was Dorothy Ruth Hoogstraten. She was born on February 28, 1960, in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Vancouver. Her parents had moved to Canada from the Netherlands a year after her birth. The Stratton family then welcomed a son named John, and 7 years later, a younger sister named Louise. The Hutton family led a simple life. Dorothy excelled academically in school, but never aspired to become a celebrity or considered a glamorous career during her childhood. All she longed for were the basic necessities that her impoverished family couldn't afford. In 1977, while still in high school, Dorothy worked as a waitress at Dairy Queen, a local fast food joint. With her blonde hair, charming face, and mature figure for her age, the 17-year-old quickly attracted attention from patrons. Both young men and older, prosperous men were captivated by her beauty. One evening, about 30 minutes before closing time at the snack bar where Dorothy worked, an intriguing young man named Paul Snyder walked in. He immediately noticed the appealing young waitress. Paul made his order and handed her a large bill for payment. When Dorothy mentioned she couldn't provide change for such an amount, Paul smiled and suggested she keep the change if she agreed to go on a date with him. Without much hesitation, the girl consented. At that time, 26-year-old Paul Snyder was quite well known in Vancouver. His job involved managing and scouting performers for club gigs. Catherine Paligi, often referred to as Night Butterflies, Catherine Paligi. He had numerous friends and connections throughout Canada. When Paul first saw the tall blonde with a radiant smile and graceful physique that was 17-year-old Dorothy, he knew he wanted to know more about her. He immediately recognized her immense potential. Paul took the stunning young lady out on a date, an upscale restaurant, and afterwards gifted her a red evening gown, which she later wore for her high school prom. As and Dorothy began their relationship, Her parents remained unconcerned about their romance and didn't restrict their daughter from seeing a man 9 years older. A few months into their relationship, Paul started encouraging Dorothy to engage in a daring photo shoot. Initially, Dorothy was hesitant, but Paul persisted, asserting that she had excellent prospects in modeling and could earn a substantial income. Eventually, she agreed to his suggestion. Paul secured a studio, hired a professional photographer, and arranged for Dorothy to participate in a nude-themed photo shoot. Once the photos were completed, he submitted them to the editorial team of the globally renowned men's magazine Playboy. Dorothy's pictures created a sensation. A Playboy editor invited her to Los Angeles. Knowing that her parents would disapprove of such provocative work, Paul forged Dorothy's mother's signature, claiming she permitted her daughter to sign a deal with the famed magazine. In the summer of 1979, Paul and Dorothy traveled from Canada to the United States, arriving in Hollywood. By August, Dorothy Stratton had risen to fame as Playboy magazine's Playmate of the Month. Subsequently, she started working as a bunny at the Playboy Club. She admitted over the phone to friends that her new role was quite overwhelming. Unaccustomed to such limelight, she found it daunting as affluent men were smitten with her, eager to spend time with and showering praises upon her. Paul Snider was constantly by her side, offering his support. He took on roles as her manager and chauffeur, organizing photo shoots and negotiating contracts. Dorothy's existence became entirely dominated by this man. To strengthen their bond further, Paul proposed marriage. Initially uncertain about marrying him, but ultimately feeling indebted for his role in advancing her career, Dorothy consented. Dorothy realized that without Paul Snider, she would likely still be waiting tables at a snack bar, relying on tips. Her life wouldn't have taken its fairy tale turn. Her family cautioned her against marrying Paul, suspecting he was exploiting the young woman for financial gain. In 1979, the same year Paul and Dorothy tied the knot in Las Vegas, the wedding was simple, with no lavish festivities. Post-marriage, the duo remained industrious. Dorothy became involved in filming several movies, where directors acknowledged her not just for her beauty and aura, but also for her acting prowess. As Dorothy's fame and earnings escalated, she used her income to purchase a spacious home in Los Angeles. She resided there with her husband. Paul Snider was content with his wife's achievements and boasted to friends that Dorothy's rising popularity was a collective success. Acting as her manager, he was a constant presence at her shoots and events, overseeing their finances and assets. He also kept a close watch on her diet, clothing choices, alcohol intake at social gatherings, and occasionally guided her on whom to engage with intimately among influential figures to further her career. Speculations arose about Dorothy having a romantic liaison with Hugh Hefner, the chief editor of Playboy magazine. However, Hefner refuted these claims and asserted that Stratton was not a woman of loose morals. As time progressed, the model began to discern that her husband was exerting excessive control over her life. She appointed a new professional manager and started excluding Paul from photo shoots by fabricating various pretexts. The gap between the couple widened, and sensing this, Paul's mental state deteriorated. He guarded his wife with insane jealousy, even employing a private detective to monitor her movements, yet no incriminating evidence surfaced. Paul imposed restrictions on his wife's wardrobe, disallowing her from wearing provocative attire because he didn't want men who offered no financial gain to their family admiring her. He instigated conflicts, and in moments of rage, even resorted to physical abuse. Dorothy struggled to cope with her husband's aggressive outbursts, increasingly seeking distance from him. Friends and colleagues noticed the growing troubles in Paul and Dorothy's marriage. Staff at Playboy frequently advised Dorothy to end her relationship with her husband. While Dorothy was busy with photo shoots, Paul stayed at their house, using her earnings and languishing in inactivity. One day, Paul discovered that Dorothy had set up a company in her name and was actively investing in it. This strategy, suggested by her manager, was designed to ensure that in the event of a divorce, Paul Snider would not have any claims over the money. Paul's behavior escalated into creating more scandals as he realized his influence over his wife was waning. With Dorothy seldom returning home, Snyder began to see that his control over what he considered his golden ticket was slipping away. In the spring of 1980, during a gathering at the Playboy Mansion, 20-year-old Dorothy met Peter Bogdanovich, a well-known 40-year-old film director and close associate of Hugh Hefner. The director was captivated by Dorothy and invited her to act in his upcoming comedy, They All Laughed. Dorothy accepted the offer to play the role of a mistress. On March 22nd, Stratton went on a solo trip to New York for filming. She misled Paul by saying that the director had prohibited anyone besides cast and crew from being present. She convinced him to stay in Los Angeles because she feared he might cause disturbances during the shoot. Additionally, Dorothy requested her manager filter calls from her overbearing husband while she was on set. During her time in New York, Dorothy found herself deeply enamored with Bogdanovich. A passionate romance blossomed between them, filling Dorothy with joy. She did not want to miss this opportunity with an influential director. As a result, her demeanor toward her husband became increasingly distant and aloof. Dorothy spent 2 months in New York. During period, Paul Snyder remained alone in their expansive house in Los Angeles. Occasionally, he would bring other women home, who were surprised to find that Paul was being unfaithful to such a stunning spouse, a Playboy model. In April 1980, Dorothy returned to California for the Playboy Award ceremony. She earned the prestigious title of Playmate of the Year and graced the magazine's cover, gaining a new accolade. As part of her recognition, she received a lavish gift from Playboy, a Jaguar sports car and a cash award of $200,000. Dorothy had developed a close friendship with Hugh Hefner, the chief editor, who harbored great expectations for this rising star. After the ceremony, Dorothy embarked on a 2-week promotional tour across Canada. On weekends, she flew out for dates with director Peter Bogdanovich. She intended to spend the final days of the tour with her family in Vancouver. Upon learning this, Paul Snyder immediately flew to Canada. Leveraging his past experience as a nightclub manager and his numerous connections in Vancouver, during Dorothy's brief holiday, Paul coerced her into working in clubs and pocketed all the profits. During this time, a significant altercation erupted between them. In tears, Dorothy suggested quitting her career to salvage their marriage. She proposed that they both return to her parents and start afresh. However, Snyder rejected this idea. After the tour in Canada, Dorothy returned to New York and continued filming the comedy, They All Laughed. She began ignoring her husband's calls and further distanced herself from him. One day, Dorothy called Paul herself and asked for more freedom in their relationship. Snyder became increasingly depressed and very angry with his wife. It is known that at that time, Paul Snyder was involved with a young girl who was not yet 18 years old. She had a model-like appearance, and Paul hoped to make her a new Playboy bunny. In June 1980, on their first wedding anniversary, Paul got a distressing letter from Dorothy. She mentioned wanting a divorce and said she would stop giving him financial support. This confirmed Paul's fears about her being unfaithful director Peter Bogdanovich. Paul hired a private investigator to dig up evidence of this alleged affair. One time, Paul called Dorothy's manager, threatening to cause a disturbance or maybe something even worse. The manager told Dorothy to get a bodyguard and be careful of Paul, but she ignored the advice. Paul, without a green card and facing work barriers in America, saw his finances dwindle. He started draining their joint bank accounts and sold off valuable items like collectibles, jewelry, and a Jaguar sports car that Playboy had given her. He accepted cash transactions only and often sold at big discounts. To make matters worse, Paul also rented out rooms in their large home to friends, driven partly by depression and loneliness. He began thinking about going back to Canada. In mid-July, after filming for They All Laughed ended, Dorothy and Bogdanovich went on a 10-day trip to England. They came back to Los Angeles on July 30th. Dorothy then moved into Bogdanovich's mansion in Beverly Hills. On the afternoon of July 31st, Paul borrowed a handgun from someone he knew. That night, he went to Peter Bogdanovich's house with the gun in hand. He hid nearby, determined to shoot anyone who came close to the gates of the mansion. After waiting several hours and growing impatient, Paul drove up to a mountain area overlooking Los Angeles at night. He later told a friend that during his time alone there, he was plagued by dark thoughts about ending his own life late into the night. Snyder returned to their home a week later on August 3rd. Paul managed to convince Dorothy to meet him at their residence. He hoped to rekindle their relationship, reminiscent of the charm he wielded in the modest diner where they first met. However, the Dorothy who arrived was no longer the naive schoolgirl he once knew. She had transformed into a self-assured woman, no longer easily swayed by her husband's persuasions. Dorothy revealed to Paul that she loved another man and intended to divorce him. Snyder, maintaining his composure, requested that she return in a week so they could calmly discuss the particulars of their separation. The following day, Paul zealously set out to purchase a firearm. He scoured shops, but his Canadian citizenship deterred sellers from transacting with him. He even asked his private investigator to procure a rifle under the pretext of self-protection and home security. However, the detective dissuaded him and declined to assist. On August 11th, Snyder spotted an ad in the newspaper. A hunter was selling an old 12-gauge shotgun. He drove to the San Fernando Valley intending to inspect and potentially acquire the firearm. Unfortunately, he lost his way and failed to locate the address and had to return without it. On August 13th, 2 days later, Paul revisited the same location. This time, he successfully found the seller and purchased the aged shotgun, telling them of his plans to go hunting. On August 14th, anticipating his meeting with Dorothy, Paul Snyder requested his roommates vacate the house until evening to ensure uninterrupted privacy for his conversation with his wife. Dorothy's managers and assistants urged her to let them accompany her to the meeting or handle the divorce discussions over phone calls. However, Dorothy chose to go alone. She carried a substantial amount of money with her, intending to generously express her gratitude for Paul's past contributions in her life. She aimed for a peaceful separation and hoped to maintain a cordial relationship. Believing the meeting would be brief, she scheduled a photo shoot for later that evening. Dorothy arrived at her home at noon on August 14th to meet with Paul Snyder. He courteously welcomed her inside. Shortly after, her phone rang. It was a safety check call from her manager. They had pre-arranged that if Dorothy encountered any trouble, she would use a specific code word during the call. She assured the caller that all was well and quickly concluded the conversation. The discussion between Dorothy and Paul continued, but eventually escalated into a dispute. In a sudden violent outburst, Paul Snyder produced a shotgun and fatally shot Dorothy in the face. It was reported that following this heinous act, Paul engaged in an act of necrophilia with his deceased wife before turning the gun on himself. At 8 p.m., the roommates returned to the house, noticing Stratton's car parked outside. Inside, they found her handbag in the living room. Assuming Paul had reconciled with his wife and they were together in the bedroom, the roommates retreated to their own room, turned on the TV, and endeavored to be as quiet as possible, not wanting to intrude on the couple's privacy. Meanwhile, Dorothy's managers became increasingly anxious as she had ceased responding to their calls. At 11 p.m., they finally managed to contact someone at Paul and Dorothy's residence. The roommates took the call and, after hanging up, decided to check the master bedroom. There, they stumbled upon a gruesome sight. Both Dorothy and Paul were found dead. Forensic specialists concluded that 20-year-old Dorothy Stratton died approximately 1 hour after her arrival at the house. Her 29-year-old husband, Paul Snyder, died about an hour following his wife's death. Hugh Hefner was among the first to be informed of this tragic event. He took it upon himself to contact his friend, Peter Bogdanovich, to relay the devastating news. Upon hearing about Dorothy's death, Bogdanovich was so overwhelmed that he fainted. Following this tragic event, he found himself relying on sedatives for an extended period to cope with the overwhelming shock and profound grief. The August edition of Playboy magazine had already been sent to the printers, making any last-minute changes impossible. Consequently, it featured Dorothy Stratton, who had sadly passed away. However, for their annual Playboy calendar, her image was replaced with that of another model. Hugh Hefner shared his thoughts on the somber incident, remarking, "There's a stereotype that a poor girl from a small town makes it to the pages of a magazine, moves to Hollywood, builds a dazzling career, and then dies tragically at the height of her powers. But it's not always the case." Paul Snider was a disturbed individual who realized his fortunate ticket was slipping away, which drove him to commit this horrible act. Peter Bogdanovich took charge of organizing and funding Dorothy Stratton's funeral. The loss deeply affected him, thus he opted for cremation. Her remains were interred in a cemetery in Los Angeles. Following the tragic death of the model, the film studio decided not to release They All Laughed. Determined to ensure it would see the light of day, Bogdanovich acquired the film rights using his finances. Eventually, the comedy They All Laughed was released. In 1981, despite considerable efforts, the film did not achieve any notable accolades and failed to capture the audience's interest. This commercial failure led Bogdanovich to lose millions and ultimately resulted in his declaration of bankruptcy. Several years after Dorothy Stratton's passing, rumors emerged about director Peter Bogdanovich secretly meeting her younger sister, Louise Stratton, who was 13 at the time. The Stratton family strongly denied these claims and legally contested the spread of such rumors. However, in 1988, 8 years later, the 49-year-old Bogdanovich married the 20-year-old Louise Stratton. Louise later mentioned in interviews that their romance began when she was 18. The marriage of Peter Bogdanovich and Louise Stratton lasted for 13 years, ending in divorce in 2001. Peter never remarried. He dedicated his life to his cinematic endeavors and passed away in 2022 at the age of 82. Louise Stratton now resides in her hometown of Vancouver and is pursuing a career as a Canadian actress and producer. Over 4 decades since Dorothy Stratton's murder, her life and story have continued to inspire various creative works, including films, books, and songs. A recent tribute to her can be seen in the crime drama series Welcome to Chippendales, which chronicles the story of the famed male strip dance group Chippendales, co-founded by Paul Snider. In this series, Dorothy Stratton is portrayed by Nicola Peltz, who is married into the Billingham family. The case of Antonia Barra turned a holiday into an absolute nightmare. Alcohol, especially in large quantities, can truly be detrimental, impacting both the body and mind adversely. It's no secret that an individual in a state of severe intoxication becomes highly susceptible and can easily fall prey to robbers, fraudsters, rapists, and murderers. This vulnerability is particularly pronounced for women. What is also concerning is that criminals often attempt to justify their heinous actions by claiming intoxication or placing the blame on the victim. Consequently, many individuals who experience violence choose to remain silent, struggling with their pain and solitude. Some find ways to move forward, but for others, this weight becomes too heavy to bear. Antonia Barra's story exemplifies the devastating impact of silence and societal condemnation. It illustrates how an individual who caused immense suffering to numerous young women could go unpunished for too long. Her case shook the entire nation of Chile, sparking public outrage and leading to mass protests. It also highlighted flaws in the criminal system that allowed rapists' actions to be justified. The widespread response ultimately led to the removal of a dangerous criminal from society, thereby protecting other potential victims. Regarding Antonia Barra, she was born on December 3, 1999, in the city of Tamoco, which is the administrative center of the same-named district in Chile. She was the youngest of 5 children in a well-off family headed by Alejandro and Marcela Barra. Her siblings included 2 older brothers named Sebastian and Ignacio, and 2 sisters named Catalina and Carla. Among them all, Antonia shared an especially close bond with her sister Catalina. They were best friends and confidantes. Her parents invested significantly in the education and comprehensive development of their children, They were involved in sports and music activities, and all attended prestigious colleges following high school graduation. As the youngest child, Antonia received a lot of love and attention from her parents without compromising her academic performance. She excelled at school with aspirations of pursuing a career in tourism and exploring different parts of the world. In conclusion, Antonia Barra's legacy highlights critical societal issues regarding violence and justice, while pushing for meaningful reform within legal systems to protect vulnerable populations effectively. In 2015, a 15-year-old named Antonia met Martin Pronis on social media. Both resided in the same city, with Martin living not far from Antonia. He was 8 years her senior and at that time already divorced with a child. Details about his early life are sparse. Born in February 1992 in Tomoko, Martin was the second of 3 children born to Ivan Pronis and Paula Dare. At the age of 20, he impregnated a schoolmate and married her to avoid scandal and penalties. This marriage dissolved shortly after their child's birth. Communication between Martin and Antonia occurred from 2015 to 2017 via social networks. The relationship remained purely platonic. Post-high school graduation, Antonia attended university in another city where she pursued studies in the travel industry. This transition ushered in new friends and hobbies for her. Martin faded from her thoughts. Antonia returned home only during vacations and holidays, but maintained regular contact with her family. At university, Antonia formed a close friendship with Consuela Urbe, becoming nearly inseparable companions. She also dated Rodrigo Aguad for about a year before they decided to take a break from their relationship in September 2019 at the start of the new semester. Following this breakup, Antonia felt distressed and sought distraction from her emotional turmoil. Coincidentally, an upcoming Chilean national holiday promised an extended weekend filled with various events. Seizing this opportunity, she and Consuela opted to attend an electronic music festival held in the scenic town of Pucón to unwind and rejuvenate. They traveled in Consuela's car, taking 3 additional university friends with them. In that city, there was a summer house owned by close friends of the Barra family. Though the owners were out of the city at the time, they kindly offered Antonia and her friend to stay there, informing them about the spare key's location. Upon arrival, their companions went their separate ways, while Ant and her friend settled into a large and cozy house for the weekend. On the evening of September 18th, during a walk around the city, Antonia accidentally encountered Martin. They engaged in conversation and discovered that Martin was also in town for the festival with his friends. They were staying in a rented house a couple of miles from the city center. The two had a pleasant chat and decided to meet the next day at a party scheduled to take place in one of the popular nightclubs. In a phone conversation with her parents, Antonia shared her plans. Her father sternly advised her to avoid excessive drinking and behave prudently. Laughing it off, she assured him everything would be fine. The next day, she and her friends spent hours preparing for the party, choosing outfits, applying makeup, and then headed to the club. Before leaving, they shared a bottle of wine and then took a taxi to the club. Once there, they ordered another bottle of champagne at the bar and enjoyed it together before heading to the dance floor. Around midnight, Martin and his friends arrived and quickly found Antonia. By then, both were already quite intoxicated, but continued drinking and dancing. Consuela mentioned trying to dissuade her friend from drinking more, but Antonia didn't listen. At some point, Consuela lost track of Barra and began searching for her. She found her about half an hour later in another room with Martin. By this time, Antonia was heavily intoxicated and could barely stand. There, Consuela saw their classmate Benjamin Morales and asked him for assistance in taking Antonia home. However, Antonia resisted vehemently. She insisted on staying because the night was young. A few moments later, she felt unwell. Friends escorted Barra outside for fresh air before returning inside once more. Towards morning, feeling weary, Consuela approached again, suggesting they leave together as she needed rest. Yet Antonia chose to stay behind and continue partying. Urbe eventually abandoned efforts to persuade her friend any further. She took a taxi home alone and immediately went to bed upon arrival. What was meant to be a fun night had devolved into chaos. Around 6 in the morning, Benjamin observed Martin escorting Antonia out of the club. Martin was hugging and holding her as she was swaying from side to side. According to him, she seemed disoriented, and Panis exploited this situation. They lingered near the entrance because Antonia felt unwell. They waited for her condition to improve a bit. Eventually, Martin's friends joined them, suggesting they continue their party at a rented house. They called a taxi for transportation, but Bara and Pinus decided to walk due to Antonia's sickness and confusion. Their journey was captured by surveillance cameras. The footage revealed that Martin was leading a visibly intoxicated student who attempted to free herself from his hold. Along the way, they stopped at a 24-hour supermarket where Martin chose to purchase beer. The store was empty. At one point, he made an attempt to kiss Antonia. However, she pushed him away and turned aside. She clearly felt uncomfortable, but couldn't leave or resist effectively. In this scenario, Pronus had the upper hand and continued to guide Antonia. By approximately 8 in the morning, they arrived at the rented house. The friends in the living room observed that Antonia appeared visibly upset. Yet due to her significant intoxication level, she couldn't articulate her distress effectively. Meanwhile, Martin persistently hugged her and attempted to kiss her repeatedly. Given that all other friends were also heavily intoxicated, no one intervened. Soon after, the pair moved into one of the bedrooms where Martin assaulted Antonia while she was still dazed and confused about what was happening around her. Despite trying to resist and asking him to stop several times, Martin ignored her protests completely. When festivities concluded, he rejoined his friends in the living room to continue celebrating. Antonia, however, remained in the bedroom. At around 9 a.m., she called Benjamin, desperately asking him to take her home. Benjamin could barely understand her because her speech was slurred. She was being continuously and couldn't clearly convey what had happened or where she was. Concerned, Benjamin informed Consuela about the call, suggesting Antonia might be in trouble and need assistance. Consuela then contacted Antonia herself. With significant effort, she managed to ascertain Antonia's location and went to retrieve her. Upon arriving at the location, she encountered Martin and demanded an explanation of his actions. Martin merely smiled and claimed everything was consensual. Inside one of the rooms, Consuela found Antonia in a distressing state, crying and desperate to leave immediately. Without hesitation, they headed home, where Antonia took a shower, despite Consuela's advice not to wash away potential evidence and to contact the police right away. However, Antonia insisted that no one should find out about what had happened. Later that afternoon, she phoned her parents, attempting to mask any signs that something was amiss. The following morning, the girl and her friends drove back to their student dormitory. Faced with depression, bullying, and a desperate act, Antonia hoped to quickly forget the nightmare she experienced in Pukan and to resume her previous life. She attended classes and spoke with friends, but only Consuela truly recognized her mental state. Sadly, Consuela's efforts were insufficient to prevent Antonia from slipping into severe depression. Antonia chose not to discuss the incident or file a police report, fearing public exposure of her ordeal. Despite her silence, rumors spread swiftly, becoming embellished with fabricated intimate details created by gossipers behind Antonia's back. People whispered, pointed at her, and laughed. A fellow student even confronted her publicly about the rumors. The breaking point for Antonia was receiving a call from her ex-boyfriend Rodrigo, whom she still loved and hoped to reconcile with. During the phone conversation, Aguad repeated all the rumors he had heard and coldly informed Antonia he no longer wanted to see or meet with her again. Though she cried and tried to explain that everything happening was staged, a ruse, Rodrigo responded with harsh words. He swore at her, insulted her character, and then abruptly ended the call. For Antonia, this conversation dealt an insurmountable emotional blow. On Saturday, October 12, 2019, Antonia visited her parents' house to spend time with her family. Relatives noticed a sadness in her eyes, yet she persistently claimed everything was fine. That evening, she posted a few childhood photos on her social network profile and included a melancholic message. The next day, after the family had dinner together, Antonia went to her room on the third floor of the house and stayed there. Approximately an hour later, her sister Catalina, with whom she had always been very close, checked on her. Antonia expressed a desire to sleep, asked Catalina to turn off the light and leave her alone. As Catalina left the room, she told Antonia that she loved her. A couple of hours passed before their mother, Marcella, went up to inform Antonia that dinner was ready. She knocked several times but received no response. Upon entering the room, she initially thought Antonia was asleep. However, when she touched her hand, she realized that Antonia had passed away. Marcella screamed for help. Everyone in the house rushed into the room. They immediately called an ambulance and tried to revive Antonia before medical professionals arrived. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. It was later determined that Antonia had taken a lethal dose of sleeping pills in an apparent decision to end her life. The investigation and initial attempts to hold the offender accountable were an immense shock to Antonia's family and friends, largely because many were unaware of her troubled emotional state. Bara's parents resolved to speak with their daughter's friends and classmates. They wanted to understand what had transpired. The rumors and gossip they uncovered were deeply distressing. Consuela offered insights into the situation, sharing all she knew. However, this wasn't sufficient for the parents. Hence, they decided to hire the best private detective in town to reconstruct the crime and gather evidence necessary for bringing the perpetrator to justice. Furthermore, Alejandro took it upon himself to publicize the case. Leveraging his connections, he organized a press conference where he disclosed, before numerous cameras, that his daughter had been forcefully taken and bullied, a trauma she could not endure. He emphasized that the individual responsible was still at large. The detective successfully pieced together the sequence of events from that tragic night and secured testimonies from several witnesses willing to testify in court. Among these witnesses were Consuela, Benjamin, and a few other university students. The Barra family made an appeal to the court, urging that Martin be arrested and face consequences for his actions. However, police officers determined that the evidence provided wasn't sufficient to detain Pronis. He maintained that everything happened by mutual consent, although he did admit that both parties were under the influence of alcohol. Additionally, the victim had not contacted the police. Martin stayed free, and soon he and his family filed a lawsuit against the Barra family. They accused them of defamation, harassment, and revealing their personal data and information. According to Martin's family, Antonia's relatives had slandered their son and brother. Pronis also opted to hold a press conference to present their side publicly. They claimed they were victims too, stating that Martin had been slandered, his honor damaged, and his reputation ruined. Pronis alleged that Barra disclosed their home address, phone numbers, and social media details, which led to Martin and his family receiving daily insults and death threats anonymously. They reiterated that Martin's guilt hadn't been proven and insisted everything occurred with mutual consent. Furthermore, they expressed readiness to defend Martin's case in court with full support from his family members. It's quite unexpected, but after the statement, the police decided to support the Pronis family. This shift made Antonia's relatives hold back from negative remarks about them and avoid sharing personal information. For the family, this was a significant setback. Despite this, they kept pushing for justice with public backing. Victims who had stayed quiet since Antonia's case gathered widespread attention. Soon, 8 more girls went to the police within a month. They claimed they had also faced harassment and violence from Martin, but had kept silent out of fear of judgment and scorn. One victim was just 13 years old when assaulted. As more girls who had suffered from Martin's illegal actions began contacting authorities one by one, he was finally taken into custody. He was arrested in June 2020 and sent to Tomoko City Prison, under suspicion of assaults committed between 2011 and 2019. However, less than a month later, Martin's lawyer ensured that his client was released on his own recognizance for the duration of the investigation. Additionally, several lawsuits from the injured girls were rejected due to the statute of limitations of the crime, raising the likelihood that they would not be considered. Out of the 8 appeals, the court only registered 2 cases. The news of Martin's release and the dismissal of the victims' claims sparked public outrage. A wave of protests and rallies swept across the country, with thousands demanding justice in the streets. Responding to the public outcry, the prosecutor's office initiated a review of the case and called for a change in the suspect's measure of restraint, advocating for his return to custody. Simultaneously, the statute of limitations was lifted for all cases of violence committed by Pronis. Trial and sentencing occurred in February 2021. During this time, the suspect's messages on social networks, where he boasted of his actions to his friends, were exposed. It was discovered that Martin kept the underwear of his victims at home as trophies. Among these items were the underwear of victims who had previously appealed to the court, as well as an item belonging to Antonia. On August 26, 2021, the defendant was charged with 9 crimes against sexual integrity, 3 of which involved victims under the age of 18 at the time. Once again, the Barra family appealed to the public, urging them not to remain silent about the violence and to bring those responsible to justice. The hearings for the case began in June 2022, allowing Martin's lawyers time to prepare thoroughly. They presented witness statements and recordings from surveillance cameras, indicating that Antonia willingly accompanied the defendant and did not resist him. The defense also questioned the testimonies of other victims. However, in August 2022, the court found Martin guilty of 8 crimes against sexual integrity and of driving Antonia to a nervous breakdown, resulting in her passing away. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Pronis, along with his legal team, immediately filed an appeal. On December 29th, the Supreme Court appointed a new trial. In March 2023, Martin's case was transferred to public defense, where he maintained his plea of not guilty, shifting blame onto Antonia for the events that unfolded. However, on July 7, 2023, the defendant was found guilty again, but the 20-year sentence previously imposed on him was reduced to 17 years. This reduction took into account the 3 years that the defendant had already spent in prison, leaving him with only 14 years left to serve. Antonia's family expressed their dissatisfaction with this decision. In an official press release issued by the girl's father, it was noted that no punishment could ever bring back their daughter and sister to them. While the legal battles were ongoing, Antonia's family, along with other victims affected by Martin's actions, turned to public figures to advocate for women's rights. Collaboratively, they worked to amend the criminal code, specifically focusing on paragraphs related to sexual offenses. Their objective was to safeguard the rights of victims of harassment and sexual violence. This initiative was named the Antonia Barr Law and proposed the abolition of limitations for crimes of an intimate nature, as well as an increase in the sentence for a perpetrator if a victim's life ended as a result of the assault. The case of Annie Lee, found bricked up in a wall on her own wedding day. Yale Research University in the United States is one of the most famous and prestigious higher education institutions not only in America, but also in the whole world. Its total area covers almost 70 hectares of land, on which there are more than 200 buildings. This territory is considered safe enough, but sometimes there are high-profile crimes. For example, in 1999, a 21-year-old student, Susan Joven, was brutally murdered there. This crime was never solved, but for a long time, the main suspect in the case was a university professor and the girl's supervisor, James Van de Velde. The story, which will be discussed today, took place 10 years after the brutal murder of Susan and turned out to be no less cruel and shocking. True, this time the killer did not manage to escape punishment. The victim of the crime was a 24-year-old graduate student named Annie Lee, who at the time was engaged in writing a dissertation, seeking a degree. The girl was literally walled up inside the university walls in the hope that her body would never be found. The motives for this heinous crime have not been fully elucidated. The killer himself could not explain what made him kill the student, and the investigation put forward two main and, in a sense, contradictory versions. According to the first, the reason for the murder was a work conflict and personal animosity. According to the other version, the perpetrator was secretly in love with his victim, and he was driven by jealousy and morbid passion. In favor of the second theory was the fact that Annie took her life 5 days before her wedding. Who was Annie Lee? Annie Maria Lee was born in 1985, the 3rd of July in San Jose, California, and became the only child in a simple family of Vivian Vam Lee and Hogan Lee, immigrants from Vietnam. From an early age, the girl was unusually smart and talented, studied on the excellent, and was considered the best student in school. And her favorite subjects were chemistry and biology. Teachers even then prophesied her a great future in science, and also said that she will probably one day be awarded the Nobel Prize for her discoveries and achievements. The girl was a regular participant of school scientific conferences, and her work was repeatedly recognized with various prizes and awards. As a high school student, she won $165,000 as a scholarship to study at any of the universities in the United States. Annie's choice fell on the University of Rochester in New York, where she studied in the specialties of biology of cellular development as well as medical anthropology. Then the girl entered the graduate school of the prestigious Yale University, where she worked in a scientific laboratory, diligently studied chemistry and biology to get a doctoral degree. The girl was engaged in writing a dissertation, which was devoted to the study of diseases provoked by metabolic disorders. Lee also devoted a lot of time to work in the laboratory. She made good progress in her research and even managed to make a certain contribution to the treatment of diabetes mellitus, as well as some forms of cancer. Personal life of a female student. While studying at the University of Rochester in New York, young Annie met a young man whose name was Jonathan Wadowski. He was also an excellent student and a promising scientist, but specialized in physical and mathematical sciences. The relationship between them developed quite quickly, and the parents of the couple in love were very pleased with the choice of their children. After receiving a diploma, Annie went to New Haven, Connecticut, to Yale, and her lover decided to do science at Columbia University in New York. But despite the distance that separated the couple, the romance continued. They visited each other every weekend and made big plans for the future. In the summer of 2009, Jonathan made a formal marriage proposal to his girlfriend, giving a beautiful diamond ring, and the happy girl willingly agreed to become his wife. The wedding was scheduled for Sunday, September 13th, 2009. However, after the engagement, young people told about the upcoming solemn event only to their parents, and friends and colleagues of the couple remained in the dark. Only a week before the wedding, September 6th, the girl sent emails to friends and colleagues which reported that she and Jonathan are preparing to enter into marriage and attached an invitation to the wedding. The next day, the news became perhaps the most talked about news in the department and in the lab where Annie worked. The couple planned to have the ceremony on Long Island and then fly to one of the fashionable resorts in Greece, where they were going to spend their honeymoon. It is noteworthy that just a few months before the tragedy, the girl had written an article for a university publication in which she warned students about various dangers and told them how to protect themselves while being outside their campus. The graduate student herself was waiting for trouble at her workplace and, alas, was unable to protect herself. Entered the building and disappeared without a trace. On Tuesday, September 8th, early in the morning, Lee left the university dormitory where she shared a room with 3 friends and went to the laboratory of the University Medical Center where she worked. The building is located on Amistad Street, and access to it, as well as any movement inside, is only possible with a pass and a special keycard. The CCTV camera at the entrance recorded Annie entering the building at around 10 o'clock in the morning. She went straight to her office where she changed her clothes, left her bag with personal belongings, put on a medical coat, and then locked the door, and went to work in the bio lab. But she never came back. That day she seemed to disappear somewhere in the corridors, and no one ever saw her alive again. In the evening of the same day, Annie's dormitory neighbors were the first to sound the alarm. Since the girl was very responsible and punctual, she always came back at about the same time. But it was nearing midnight, and she was still gone. In addition, Lee's phone did not answer, and therefore the worried friends decided to report it to the police. As it turned out, the girl's parents and fiancé also could not reach her that night, but they thought that perhaps she was delayed at work because of the heavy workload, and after herself will call them back. Arriving police officers, having heard about what happened, were not too concerned either, and assumed that Annie was a typical runaway bride, and she, unable to cope with the nervous tension on the eve of the wedding, decided to leave everything for a while to put her thoughts in order. However, the opinion of law enforcement officers quickly changed after they examined the girl's office, as well as studied CCTV footage and tracked the movements of the graduate student inside the building using a key card belonging to her. It appeared that Annie had entered the building in the morning but never left it again. Her clothes, bag, wallet, and cell phone were left in the office. No trace of the girl was found, as if she had simply disappeared. No solid evidence or leads could be found, so the Federal Bureau of Investigation was called in. Search for missing graduate student and interrogation of suspects. Everyone who knew Lee personally described her as intelligent, kind, cheerful, and very energetic. She had no enemies or ill-wishers, according to those around her. The family and the fiancé waited several days for any news, sincerely hoping that Annie would be found alive. However, the detectives were not so optimistic, and taking into account all the circumstances, came to the conclusion that the girl is most likely no longer alive. The laboratory building was placed under special guard as a likely crime scene, and since only staff and students had access to it by name badges, the circle of suspects was clearly defined and limited. The atmosphere at the university was very tense, because everyone realized that a possible murderer was somewhere nearby. Jonathan, who arrived in New Haven on the first flight, was also questioned, but the young man had an ironclad alibi because he was in another state. In addition, the groom was very concerned about what was going on and seemed to be balancing on the verge of a nervous breakdown himself. Among the suspects was one of the teachers and supervisor of the girl. He, on the day of her disappearance, for some unknown reason, canceled his lectures, and he had no alibi. However, after interrogation, his involvement in the case was strongly doubted. However, the police still had no doubt that the perpetrator should be sought among the students, faculty, and staff of the laboratory of Yale University. A gruesome discovery in the wall of a building. On September 12th, the first tangible evidence that the missing graduate student was no longer alive was discovered. Under the slabs of the false ceiling in one of the auxiliary rooms found a medical coat with bloodstains. The item did not belong to Lee, but the blood on it, as the examination showed, was hers. Now the girl was officially considered dead, and the case was reclassified as a murder. On Sunday, September 13th, when Annie was to be legally married to her lover and then fly with him to Greece on a wedding trip, her disfigured, breathless body was found on the technical floor of the laboratory. The victim had been hidden in the wall in a narrow pipeline where she had been shoved upside down. Since the girl was petite, her height was less than 150 centimeters, and fragile build, obviously, to put her there did not leave much difficulty. A service dog, which smelled the odor of decomposition, helped to find the terrible hiding place. The police immediately noted that the corpse could only be placed here by a person who knows the layout of the building well, as it is simply impossible to choose a better place to hide the remains. The girl's body was badly disfigured. Almost all her ribs were broken. Her limbs were damaged. Some of her teeth were knocked out. But the cause of death, according to the conclusion of pathologists, was mechanical asphyxia. To put it simply, the unfortunate woman was severely beaten and then strangled, and her breathless body was stuffed into a pipe in the basement wall. It was also curious that traces of seminal fluid were found on the clothes of the murdered woman, but the examination showed that she herself had not been raped. Prime suspect. A few days earlier, a young technician named Raymond John Clark III had come to the attention of the police. He was questioned along with other lab employees, but he was the only person who claimed to have allegedly seen Lee leave the building that evening, but was without her belongings, as if she was going to return. The young man's words immediately struck law enforcement as suspicious, and when the missing woman's body was found, Raymond became the prime suspect. They collected a DNA sample from the boy and took from him a covenant not to leave the country until the end of the investigation. But on September 17th, he was arrested. The examination showed that it was his seminal fluid found on the clothes of the murdered woman, and his robe with traces of the victim's blood was hidden under the slabs of the suspended ceiling. Moreover, there were suspicious bruises on the technician's body, which indicated that the girl had been desperately defending herself before her death. He himself, despite the obvious evidence, categorically denied his involvement in the case. However, as it turned out, Raymond was a man with a temper and conflict. At work, he repeatedly entered into verbal altercations with laboratory staff, and in ordinary life was characterized by cruelty, allowing himself to beat girls with whom he had various times met. Clark could not boast of serious achievements in his studies, but at school he was considered a promising athlete, had a rather attractive appearance, was strong, and enjoyed the success of the fair sex. The guy could not enter the university because of a low passing score, but thanks to the patronage of some of his relatives, he was hired to work in the laboratory, where he was first a janitor, and after a few years he was promoted to technician. During that period, he was dating a girl named Jessica Del Rocco, who in court agreed to testify against her ex-lover. She characterized Clark as a tyrant obsessed with control and surveillance. According to the girl, the boyfriend checked her phone, read correspondence, forbade to communicate with friends, and himself determined where she went and what to wear. In case of disagreements, he used his fists. After another beating, she literally ran away from him and even moved for a while to relatives in another state, fearing persecution, but the police then never went to the police. For the past year, Raymond had been dating a Yale University student named Jennifer Hromadko. Despite rumors about the pathological infidelity of the guy and his relationship with other students, graduate students, as well as some employees of the laboratory, Jennifer accepted Clark's proposal to become his wife and even began to prepare for the wedding. Motive for murder. Despite the fact that the evidence of Raymond's guilt was abundant, his motive remained unclear. He himself has not voiced it even after he fully admitted his guilt. Initially put forward the version that the murder occurred on the basis of industrial conflict. So Lee conducted experiments on laboratory mice, studying the effectiveness of enzymes in the treatment of cancer, diabetes, and other ailments, and the rodents themselves were under the control of Clark, who considered the laboratory as his domain. He himself always followed the rules and forced all employees to adhere to them, often behaved arrogantly and provoked conflicts, for which he repeatedly complained to his superiors. On the day of the murder, the girl stayed late in the laboratory, and judging by her movements with the key card, she entered the block where the experimental animals were kept. Clark, who might not have liked the fact that a co-worker was in a room he had already cleaned, had also entered. On this ground, there could be a conflict, which turned into a fight and ended in strangulation in a fit of rage. However, there is another version, according to which Raymond has long tried to court a pretty graduate student, but she did not reciprocate, which hurt the guy, unused to refusals. And on September 7th, when it became known about the upcoming wedding of the girl, The technician literally went crazy with jealousy. The next day, left alone with her in the laboratory, he attacked Lee, beat her, attempted rape, and strangled her. This version explains the presence of seminal fluid on the clothes of the murdered, but it has never been unequivocally proven. Trial and verdict. This case received wide publicity from the very beginning because the murder was committed on the campus of a prestigious university, and the victim was a graduate student and a rising star of science. The media followed the investigation and promptly reported on new details. By the way, Clark's ex-girlfriend Jessica Del Rocco gave a number of interviews and also appeared on several popular talk shows where she spoke in detail about her relationship with the suspect. Raymond first appeared in court in Connecticut on October 6, 2009, but then he denied his involvement in the murder and denied the charges against him. The hearing was postponed several times until all the materials and evidence in the case were collected. It was established that Clark had spent at least 1 hour with Lee in the laboratory, and it was during that time that the brutal murder of the girl took place. Then, probably in an effort to confuse his tracks, he used his keycard more than 50 times in various places until he was on the technical floor, where he spent about a quarter of an hour hiding the body in the wall. After that, the fire alarm in the mission suddenly went off, which the technician himself activated in order to go outside with the rest of the staff and avert suspicion from himself. An important detail was the fact that in the pocket of the robe found under the false ceiling was found a green ballpoint pen, which, as shown by the examination, Clark signed that day in various work logs. There were also witnesses who saw the technician scrubbing the lab floor in several specific places over the next few days, which seemed odd because it appeared to be clean. Moreover, he had thrown away all of the equipment used in the cleaning, as well as a pack of tissues on the table that had small brown stains on it that looked like blood splatters. All of this was later found in a trash can, and forensics confirmed that Raymond had been so thorough in trying to get rid of traces of his victim's blood. In February 2011, the defendant agreed to make a deal with the investigation and plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. So, at the next court hearing, held on March 17, 2011, Clark pleaded guilty to murder and attempted rape, as well as repented and apologized to the parents and fiancée of the girl who died at his hands. However, he never revealed the details of what happened that terrible evening in the laboratory, as well as refused to explain the motive for his act. Raymond John Clark III was sentenced to 44 years in prison. The killer is currently serving his sentence at the Cheshire Correctional Institution in New Haven County, Connecticut, and he will not be released until September 2053. Parents and fiancée Annie, in interview, have declared that they consider the appointed sentence quite fair, though it will not return to them the only daughter and the favorite bride. The girl's mother, Vivian Van Lee, made a closing speech at the sentencing. She, with tears in her eyes, said, "I will never be able to hold Annie again. I will never see my daughter walk down the aisle. I will never hear her laugh, and I will never have grandchildren. Goodbye, my child, the most wonderful gift God has sent me." The woman also read a poem she had written in her native Vietnamese dedicated to her daughter. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Luke Jobson. Born and raised in Thornaby, Luke Jobson attended St. Patrick's Comprehensive and Harewood Primary Schools. With a promising career ahead, he was mere months away from qualifying as an electrical and mechanical engineer after completing 4 years of studying and an apprenticeship. A talented sportsman, Luke's impressive football skills earned him acclaim as a center forward for Thornaby Central in his younger years. One coach fondly remembered him as the fastest runner on 2 legs. His father, Stuart, cherished memories of Luke's passion for fashion and his meticulous attention to detail, often playfully pointing out any creases in his son's shirts. Luke took immense pride in his appearance, always striving to look immaculate. On Saturday, January 26, 2019, Luke and his friends visited a popular nightclub called The Keys in a small town named Yarm, where all the nightlife is concentrated on the High Street, which is where The Keys is still located today. Luke went to The Keys on Saturday night but failed to return home. When his parents tried calling him the next morning, Sunday, he didn't answer. Additionally, his friends were unable to provide any information about his whereabouts. As a result, his family issued an urgent appeal on Facebook, which prompted dozens of people to join the search for him. On Sunday, the police released their first official statement saying they were searching for Luke. A Cleveland police spokeswoman expressed extreme concern, stating that Luke's disappearance was out of character because he had not returned home or contacted family or friends. The police appealed to the public for any private CCTV or dash cam footage in the area that might aid their investigation. It was established that Luke Jobson was involved in a possible altercation shortly before he vanished. According to social media reports, he got into a fight with several individuals outside a nightclub around 2 a.m. The last sighting of Luke was near Yarm's school at approximately 2:15 a.m. While the police investigated this information, their primary focus at the time was finding the missing young man. Luke's girlfriend, Danny, took to social media to make a heartfelt plea for help, describing her ordeal as an absolute nightmare and begging anyone with information to come forward. Luke's cousin, Jake, also made an emotional appeal on Facebook, asking the public to help locate him. On Sunday, friends and family launched a search for Luke near the river in Yarm, which soon escalated into a large-scale operation. The following morning, hundreds of people gathered in the Yarm school car park, braving the bitter cold to join the search effort. The turnout was a testament to the community spirit, with many strangers among the crowd. Cars arrived filled with volunteers, while others walked to the scene bundled up in winter gear, ready to lend a hand. In total, more than 300 people participated in the search. 18 large groups combed areas as far afield as Preston Park, Stokesley, Cowboy Wood, and Roseberry Topping. Meanwhile, specialist police search teams scoured the riverbanks near Yarm School. However, at 1 p.m., the search teams received devastating news they had all feared. Despite the tireless efforts of the emergency services, Luke's family and friends, the operation ended in tragedy. The search was called off after police discovered a body in the river. Cleveland police have confirmed that a body found in the river at Yarm is that of 22-year-old Luke Jobson, who had been missing. The officers who were searching for him had recovered the body. Our thoughts are with Luke's family and friends during this difficult time, and specially trained officers will continue to provide them with support following his death. Luke's parents, Lisa Jobson and Stuart Banks, have paid a heartfelt tribute to their son. They described him as a popular, ambitious, and young man who was passionate about the gym. His mother, Lisa, said she and Luke's father are extremely proud of the person they raised. Luke's death sparked an overwhelming outpouring of emotion in Teesside. On social media, an enormous number of tributes poured in from friends and loved ones, all of whom were deeply saddened by his sudden passing. In Yarm, a massive crowd gathered on Tuesday evening to hold a vigil in his honor. As a mark of respect, everyone lit candles and added ribbons to their social media profiles. Close to 1,000 people attended the vigil, and Luke's family expressed their gratitude for the public support during the difficult days that followed his disappearance. The police launched an investigation into Luke's death and interviewed numerous individuals, including those who were at a nightclub on the night of the incident. They soon obtained CCTV footage that corroborated earlier reports of a confrontation between Luke and others. News of the altercation as the likely cause of his death spread rapidly after his disappearance, with speculation about the circumstances continuing to circulate on social media. Initially, the police only confirmed reports of a fight before Luke vanished, and they arrested 6 teenagers, 3 16-year-olds and 3 18-year-olds, on suspicion of his murder. However, they released all of them shortly after, and the detectives pressed on with their investigation. The case saw a new development only in the following January. Cleveland police charged 5 individuals aged between 17 and 20, which involves using or threatening unlawful violence, not with Luke's murder. They will soon appear in court. One of the teenagers, who was 17 at the time and has since turned 18, cannot be named due to legal age restrictions. The others are Edwin Taha, 20, who denies starting the fight, Ryan Alpe, 19, who claims there was no fight, Ali Abdul Majid, 19, who denies guilt, and Hamad Asif, 18, who also denies a fight took place. Reports suggest Edwin Taha led the gang. Under English and Welsh law, a person is guilty of affray if they use or threaten unlawful violence, causing a reasonably firm person at the scene to fear for their safety. When multiple individuals are involved, their collective conduct is considered. The CCTV footage reveals Luke fleeing the scene, suggesting he was fearful for his safety. Not only were there verbal threats against him, but physical ones as well, which will be explored later. To understand the events leading up to Luke Jobson's death, we must first identify the spark that ignited the conflict that night. Unfortunately, none of the suspects have provided a clear answer to this question. Additionally, it remains unclear where Luke's friends, with whom he was at the nightclub, were during the altercation. The police-released recording fails to clarify this. Judging from the footage, it appears Luke had no intention of leaving the club, as he was wearing only a t-shirt, with his jacket still inside the establishment. The footage reveals Luke standing up to the gang, which prompted them to chase him, forcing him to flee for his life. Fortunately, Luke's athletic abilities enabled him to outrun his pursuers, but Taha and the others soon returned to the nightclub, got into Abdul Majid's Volkswagen Golf, and eventually caught up with Luke near the school. After exiting the car, Taha sprayed an unknown substance, likely pepper spray, into Luke's face, causing him to lose his vision. In an attempt to escape, Luke climbed over the wall and entered the Yarm school grounds, where he was last seen on CCTV cameras, entering the boathouse. Sadly, Luke was never seen again after that. Luke Jobson, who had a passion for life and strived to be the best version of himself, tragically lost his life and was found dead in the water near his school 2 days after he failed to emerge from the boathouse. The cause of his death was determined to be drowning. During the investigation, all suspects initially denied any involvement, and none were taken into custody before the trial. Edwin Taha was released on bail, but later, along with Ali Abdul Majid, they both changed their pleas to guilty for their roles in the fight during the first court hearing on September 28, 2020. The autopsy was performed by pathologists Dr. Nigel Cooper and Dr. Jennifer Bolton, and the results were presented in court. The toxicology report revealed that Luke had consumed a significant amount of alcohol before his death, which would have likely caused clear signs of intoxication in an average person. Additionally, traces of a banned substance were found in his system, which he had taken some time before his death. The court was told that the combination of alcohol and the banned substance would have made Luke more susceptible to the effects of hypothermia. Luke's death was not caused by any injuries or underlying natural diseases. There was no sign of assault or inflammation in his eyes. The autopsy found no evidence that he had been sprayed with a substance before he died. However, witnesses told the inquest that Luke was pepper sprayed, struggled to walk, and was unable to see. After the incident, Taha returned to the high street and bragged to bystanders about pepper spraying Luke. The senior coroner, Claire Bailey, concluded that Luke was incapacitated by the pepper spray. The verdict was announced in October 2020. Lisa Jobson fought back tears as she read a statement outside Crown Court, where 2 young criminals were facing justice for their role in the death of her 22-year-old son, Luke. She described the gang that surrounded and chased him through Yarm High Street as a pack of wolves. His family loved and protected him from the day he was born. He was their world, their only boy, and they couldn't have wished for a better son. Now, his family misses him every minute of every day, and their pain will never go away. Their lives have been destroyed, and they will never be the same people again. They know exactly what they did, including Edwin Taha, who sprayed Luke's eyes and face, causing him hurt and pain. His family can't get out of their heads every minute of that night, and the faces of his killers are the last ones their boy had to see on this earth, a living hell. They want someone to take away their pain and bring Luke back, but no one can. At the trial, Abdul Majid's lawyer argued that his client was not aware that Taha was carrying pepper spray. According to the lawyer, Majid did not know that one of his co-accused had a weapon, and he did not expect the victim to be assaulted with it. During the hearing, Taha's lawyer mentioned that his client had a difficult upbringing, but acknowledged that this was no excuse for his actions. The lawyer explained that something was said on the night of the incident that triggered the events. And although Taha made poor decisions, he accepts that what happened was wrong. Taha's lawyer, John Nixon, also revealed that Taha had a challenging childhood, having moved to the UK from France at the age of 4 without speaking English. After his mother left him and his brother with a foster family in Stockton when he was 10, Taha struggled to cope. Judge Howard Crone informed the two defendants that, although they were not legally responsible for Luke's death, the events that unfolded would not have occurred if Luke had not been chased along Yarm High Street. Consequently, Luke would not have entered the school and boathouse, and ultimately, he would not have drowned in the River Tees on October 30th, 2020. Edwin Taha, 20, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 21 months in prison. Additionally, he received a further 4 years and 4 months of imprisonment for charges related to prohibited substances. Ali Abdul Majid, 19, of Corvus Drive, Stockton, also admitted. He was sentenced to 15 months, suspended for 18 months, and ordered to complete 300 hours of unpaid work. After the hearing at Teesside Crown Court, Temporary Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Robinson, the senior investigating officer, explained that police inquiries revealed an altercation on Yarm High Street preceding Luke's pursuit by multiple males in a vehicle. When they caught up with him, Luke was sprayed in the eyes with a noxious substance, which severely affected him. Regardless of the intentions behind the male's actions that evening, Luke's family are left grieving the loss of their beloved son and brother. The impact on his entire family has been immense and cannot be measured. While nothing can bring Luke back, now that the criminal case has concluded, we hope it brings some sense of closure to his family, allowing them to move forward with their lives. The prosecution has dropped charges against 2 individuals, 19-year-old Ryan Alpi and 18-year-old Hamad Asif. In October 2020, Chris Atkinson of the Crown Prosecution Service made a statement after the sentencing of Taha and Abdul Majid. He expressed sympathy for the family of Luke Jobson, acknowledging that this would be a difficult time for them. Atkinson emphasized that while Taha and Majid were found guilty of being involved in an affray with Luke before his death, there is no evidence to suggest that their actions directly led to the tragic events that occurred after the attack. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Adrienne Robert. Adrienne Robert was born on January 4, 1983 in Brunswick, Maine. Adrienne graduated from Leavitt High School in 2001 and the University of Maine at Augusta in 2005. In 2007, she relocated from Maine to Clearwater, Florida. Those who knew Adrienne described her as a beautiful, kind-hearted person who always radiated happiness and vitality. With a bright outlook on life, she and her boyfriend Justin were preparing to start a new chapter together. Adrienne was living with her friend Jay in a rented house at the time. Her relationship with Justin was getting serious, and in July 2012, they found a new house where they planned to move in together. On the evening of July 13, 2012, Adrienne packed her belongings and decided to throw a farewell party to mark her departure. She told Justin that she and Jay were going to either a movie or a bar, and he couldn't join them because he had an urgent matter to attend to at the same time. Justin didn't mind Adrianine spending the evening with Jay, given that they were not only roommates, but also friends. Initially, Adrianine and Jay celebrated at home, reminiscing about happy memories over a few drinks. Later, they decided to continue the night elsewhere and headed to the Diamond Dolls strip club. At 3:34 a.m., Jay called 911, informing the operator that he had just returned home to find Adrianine unresponsive. He explained that they had been at a nightclub, but she had left earlier, and he stayed behind for a while. When he got back home, he found her on the bathroom floor, her eyes open but not breathing, with signs of a struggle suggesting a crime had taken place. The operator instructed Jay to focus and administer CPR on Adrianine, providing him with step-by-step guidance. Jay carefully followed the instructions, attempting to restart Adrianine's heart until the paramedics arrived. Sadly, by the time the ambulance arrived, Adrianine had passed away, and the medical team was unable to revive her in any way. She was officially declared deceased at the scene. The police investigation focused on two key questions: who was responsible for Adrianine Roberts' death, and was her roommate involved in the crime? They began by conducting a thorough search of the house, meticulously examining every closet and searching under each bed to rule out the possibility that the perpetrator was hiding inside the residence. One of the first observations made by the detectives and forensic experts at the crime scene was the absence of any signs of forced entry on the front door. Adrianine's lifeless body was found on the bathroom floor, clad only in a bra. The fatal stab wound to her chest and signs of a fierce struggle in the bathroom suggested that she had desperately tried to defend herself. The fact that she was nearly naked led detectives to suspect that her killer was likely a man. A closer examination of Adrianine's bedroom yielded a puzzling discovery. A portion of her bedsheet had been deliberately cut off, raising questions about the motive behind this action. Detectives theorized that the perpetrator had attempted to destroy potential DNA evidence, possibly their own, which might have been present on the sheet. It was curious, however, that the culprit had not taken the entire sheet, as the remaining portion could still hold DNA traces. The investigators found a substance resembling seminal fluid and sent it to the lab for analysis. It was discovered that Adrianne's car was missing from the parking lot next to her house, suggesting that it might have been stolen by a criminal. The police launched an investigation, scouring the area for potential witnesses and issuing an all-points bulletin for Adrianne's car in an effort to crack the case. To piece together the events surrounding her death, detectives needed to reconstruct the final hours of Adrianne's life. However, their first priority was to break the devastating news to her family. The sudden and unexpected loss of their daughter sent Adrianne's parents into shock. They were consumed by grief, struggling to come to terms with the death of their beloved child. Meanwhile, Adrianne's boyfriend, Justin, was alerted to the tragedy the following morning when he saw the police cordon surrounding her house, and he immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. The detectives told Justin that Adrianne had died the night before. They explained that it was common for criminals to return to the scene of the crime, and because of his close relationship with Adrianine, they needed to investigate him as a potential suspect. It's a standard practice to scrutinize those closest to the victim in cases like this. Later, the police found Adrianine's car a few blocks from her house, with the headlights on and the keys still in the ignition. This discovery only added to their suspicions, leading them to believe that the killer had used Adrianine's car to escape. To search for clues, forensic experts carefully searched the car's interior. Meanwhile, investigators reviewed CCTV footage to try to identify the person who had been driving Adrianine's car. Although there were no cameras in the exact area where the car was found, cameras on nearby buildings did capture some footage. The recordings revealed a man wearing shorts, a baseball cap, and long hair, walking away from Adrianine's car around the time the 911 call was made. However, investigators were unable to track his movements further as he went in a different direction and disappeared from view. Police gathered additional information by interviewing witnesses. A neighbor reported seeing Adrianine and a man running on the sidewalk late at night, which was unusual given their attire. Adrianine was wearing a dress, not sportswear, and was holding her shoes in her hand. The man was not dressed for a run either, but it did not appear as though he was stalking Adrianine, as she did not scream or call for help. The investigators also questioned Adrianine's roommate, Jay, who claimed to have been with Adrianine at a club called Diamond Dolls on the night of the incident. According to Jay, they had a few drinks at home before heading to the club, where they met another man they didn't know. Jay stated that he remained at the club after Adrianine left. To verify Jay's account, the police investigated Diamond Dolls and reviewed the CCTV footage from the club. The footage confirmed that Jay and Adrianine arrived and left at the times Jay had described. Specifically, it showed that Jay left the club alone at 2:53 a.m., walked outside, crossed the parking lot, and headed towards his house. The footage also revealed that Adrianine left the club earlier at 1:38 a.m. Notably, Adrianine's attire changed between her arrival and departure from the club. When she arrived, she was wearing a dress and what appeared to be a jacket. However, when she left, she was only wearing a dress. It was later revealed that Adrianine had forgotten her jacket inside the club. 4 seconds after Adrianine left, a man in a baseball cap exited the club, chased after her, and returned the jacket she had left behind. After handing Adrianine the jacket, the two seemed to engage in conversation, but the content of their discussion remains unknown. After leaving the parking lot, the man followed Adrianine instead of going back to the club. They turned right onto a street that, as you can see, is relatively deserted with very few houses. It's unclear whether Adrianine felt threatened at this point, and we may never know for certain. By comparing the man captured on the club's CCTV footage with the man seen beside Adrianine's abandoned car, investigators determined that they were two different individuals. Given all the circumstances leading up to her death, they concluded that the likely perpetrator was the man caught on the club's CCTV, and the man in this recording was probably just a random passerby. The police were exploring every possible scenario to determine what had happened, and they were committed to providing Adrianine's parents with answers as soon as possible. When her family traveled to Florida to collect her belongings, the investigators met with Mark and Dolores, assuring them that they would exert every effort to identify and bring the perpetrator to justice. Adrianine's parents described her as a friendly person who got along with everyone, including her boyfriend Justin and roommate Jay, and didn't have any enemies. According to investigators, Adrianine's killer was likely a stranger to her. The lab results revealed that the killer had attempted to remove evidence by cutting a part of the sheet, but forensic experts still managed to find male DNA. The DNA was not only on the sheet, but also on Adrianine's body and the walls. When the police compared the DNA to their database, they were disappointed to find no matches. Despite this, they still had the DNA profile of an unknown male and CCTV footage from the club where Adrianine spent her last evening. At this stage of the investigation, detectives primarily relied on the footage as the main clue to crack the case. They re-examined the recordings, this time reviewing not only the nighttime footage, but also the daytime recordings, which yielded results. Approximately 8 hours prior to Adrianine's death, investigators identified the same man who was seen talking to Adrianine in the parking lot and left with her. The police now had a clearer image of his face. Moreover, they discovered how this unknown man arrived at the club. He took a taxi. The phone number on the taxi's body was visible on the recording, making it easy to identify the brand of the car. It was much simpler to identify the man now. The detectives traced the phone number that had ordered a taxi near Diamond Dolls, which was captured on footage, and discovered it belonged to Thomas Frederick. By comparing his driver's license photo with the CCTV footage image, detectives confirmed it was the same individual. Thomas Frederick had become the prime suspect in the case. To arrest him, the police required concrete evidence, as the camera recordings alone were insufficient. So they began secretly monitoring Frederick, careful not to spook him. They decided to obtain his DNA without his knowledge to avoid scaring him off. The officers kept Thomas Frederick under surveillance for a week and a half, waiting for the perfect moment to act. They followed him to work and staked out his house at night, patiently waiting for him to slip up and give them a lead. Their persistence paid off when Frederick carelessly discarded a cigarette butt on the road. The officers quickly collected it and sent it to the lab for DNA analysis. Their goal was to determine if Thomas Frederick was the same person who had left behind traces of evidence at Adrienne and Robert's house. While awaiting the test results, the police continued to secretly monitor Frederick, concerned that he might flee the state once the highly anticipated lab report was released. As expected, the experts' conclusion was damning. The DNA found on the bedsheet, walls, and Adrienne's body all belonged to Thomas Frederick. With this incriminating evidence, the police arrested Frederick and took him into custody at the station. During the interrogation, the man explained that he frequently visits various clubs and bars where he usually makes new friends. When the police showed him a picture of Adrienne Robert, he claimed to have met her at Diamond Dolls, where she allegedly bought him a drink, and they danced and chatted together. According to Frederick, he went to work after leaving the club, but the CCTV footage contradicted his statement, showing that he had actually left with Adrienne. When the detectives highlighted this inconsistency, Frederick changed his story, saying that he and Adrienne walked together to the end of the street before going their separate ways. This convenient alibi seems suspicious, particularly coming from someone facing a potential life sentence. When asked if he had ever visited Adrienne's house, Frederick replied that he couldn't remember due to excessive drinking. This raises questions as to whether he was intentionally contradicting himself or had genuinely limited recall of that night's events. He recalled that after leaving the club, he and Adrienne went their separate ways at the end of the street. Although he remembered going to work after the club, he claimed to have no memory of being at Adrienne's house. The investigators were convinced he was lying, as they had a witness who had seen Adrienne running barefoot, holding her shoes, with Frederick chasing after her. When the investigators confronted Frederick with this evidence, he explained that Adrienne had asked him to walk her home. However, she suddenly said she was in a hurry and removed her shoes, taking off running. Frederick claimed he had no choice but to run alongside her, insisting that he was not pursuing her, but rather keeping her company. The detectives eventually grew tired of his inconsistent stories and accused him of attacking Adrienne. Frederick was informed that his DNA was found on the sheet, Adrienne's body, and several other items in her house. When he realized he couldn't deny his involvement, he claimed he had acted in self-defense. Now that his memory has returned, he stated that he and Adrienne had consensual sex at her house. Afterwards, Adrienne became unwell and vomited in the bathroom. The two then got into a fight, during which Adrienne allegedly pulled out a knife, threatened him, and tried to harm him. Frederick claims he exercised his right to self-defense, which ultimately resulted in Adrienne's death. According to him, he panicked and didn't know what to do, so he chose not to call 911 and instead fled the scene, believing he would be blamed for Adrienne's death. In January 2014, Thomas Frederick was charged with first-degree deprivation of life. During the trial, the prosecutor presented their account of that night's events. Adrienne and Jay had been drinking at home and then went to Diamond Dolls, where they were in a good mood. Thomas Frederick joined them at a table, and they chatted casually, thinking he was an ordinary person, just relaxing with them. The day after, Adrian had to pack up her belongings and move into her new home with Justin. She chose to leave early, while Jay opted to stay behind at the club. Frederick saw an opportunity in this and secretly followed her. Adrian didn't want him tagging along and tried to shake him off, but he was relentless. He pursued her all the way to her new house, and when she went inside, he broke in, snatched a knife from the kitchen, and carried out his sinister intentions towards Adrian. According to the prosecutor, the injuries on Adrianine's body suggested that she did not consent to intercourse with Frederick. Fearing that she might report him to the police, he then decided to kill her. In an attempt to cover his tracks, he cut out a piece of the sheet that contained his seminal fluid, but the police were still able to find his DNA at the scene, including on Adrianine's body. Frederick then stole Adrianine's car keys, drove a short distance, and abandoned the vehicle. Mark and Dolores Robert have struggled to cope with life since the loss of their daughter. Thomas Frederick's defense team attempted to discredit Adrianine during the trial, claiming she had invited him to her home for consensual sex. However, this claim has no factual basis and appears to be a desperate attempt by the perpetrator to justify his presence in the victim's house. The undeniable fact is that DNA evidence points to only one person. Frederick's defense also argued that he acted in self-defense, citing the fact that Adrianine sustained a stab wound during the struggle. However, this argument was unsuccessful. The jury ultimately found Thomas Frederick guilty of first-degree murder and car theft. Although there was insufficient evidence to support the charge of forced intimacy by threatening Adrianine with a knife, Frederick's guilty verdict was a testament to the weight of the evidence against him. The court handed down a life sentence without parole to 25-year-old Thomas Hampton Frederick. Adrianine's father expressed his and his wife's elation upon learning that Frederick would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. Although this doesn't bring Adrianine back, he felt that justice had been served. He struggled to contain his emotions while in the same room as the man who took his daughter's life. Frederick showed no signs of sympathy or remorse, even when the jury delivered its verdict, and instead appeared very confident. Robert and his wife Dolores were overwhelmed with emotion as the verdict was read aloud in the courtroom. Contradicting their current sorrow, Robert reflected on his daughter Adrianine's zest for life, saying, "We were so happy. She had a passion for living, and her smile could light up a room. It's heartbreaking that we'll never experience that joy again." Adrianine's family expressed their gratitude to all who had supported them during this difficult time, including the police and the prosecutor, whose efforts had ensured the criminal received a fitting punishment. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Diana D'Aiello. Diana D'Aiello was born in 1959 in a quiet suburb city of Los Angeles called Tustin. Her dad was in the military and her mom worked at a small clothing factory. When Diana was 19, she met a guy named Kevin Green. She was at a bar with her friend when some men started bothering them. He was being too pushy, so Kevin decided to step in. After he made the guy go away, Diana offered to buy him a drink to say thanks. A few days later, they went on a date, and things moved pretty fast from there. At the time, Kevin was already married, but he and his wife were in the process of getting divorced. Meanwhile, he and Diana moved in together, and she got pregnant. As soon as Kevin's divorce was finalized, they got married the same day, eagerly awaiting the birth of their daughter. They rented an apartment in a small complex in Tustin. Kevin served in the Marines, working as a helicopter mechanic at the nearby base. Diana used to work with her mom at the clothing factory, but as her pregnancy progressed, she chose to stay at home and prepare for the arrival of their daughter. By the end of September 1979, Diana was 9.5 months pregnant and due to go to the hospital any day now. On the evening of September 30th, after watching a movie together, Diana and her husband got into an argument. The stress of impending parenthood had been weighing on both of them, so they'd been fighting quite a bit lately. Kevin decided to take a drive to a nearby fast food joint to clear his head and also avoid making the whole situation even worse. About 40 minutes later, a local police department received a chilling call. It was Kevin, and he said that someone had shot his wife and she needed an ambulance as soon as possible. A patrol car was nearby, and officers quickly arrived at the scene. On entering the apartment, they found Diana lying on the bed in her bedroom, covered in blood, seemingly from a head wound resembling a gunshot. The bedroom wall was also splattered with blood. Diana showed signs of life, trying to breathe, so the officers started performing first aid while they waited for the ambulance. They also asked Kevin to leave the room as they were still unsure of what had happened. The medics soon arrived and carefully moved Diana into the ambulance. At first, they also thought she had a gunshot wound, but they quickly realized it wasn't the case. The wound appeared to be caused by blunt force trauma. Kevin wanted to go with his wife, but the police didn't allow him to. They needed to take his statement, and at that moment, they were considering all possible scenarios, including his involvement in the attack. Kevin was clearly in shock and seemed to struggle to comprehend the officer's words. He even attempted to get into the ambulance, so they had to stop him as it drove away. He began to regain his composure and finally told the police what had happened that night. Kevin explained that he and his wife had an argument, so he decided to go to a fast food joint to get burgers and clear his head. When he left the apartment, he realized he had left his keys inside, but he chose not to go back for them. He simply shut the door and headed to his car. Kevin also mentioned that not far from their apartment complex, he saw a van with its back door open, and there was an African-American man walking back and forth to it. Given that it was around 2 a.m., Kevin found it a bit unusual. He drove to his favorite fast food place, but there was a long line, so he went to another one of the same chain a few miles away. He bought some burgers and headed home, which took about 40 minutes. When he got to the front door, Kevin found it wide open. He rushed inside and heard strange sounds like someone snoring. Upon entering the bedroom, he saw Diana covered in blood, struggling to breathe, and immediately called the police. Some parts of Kevin's story immediately raised questions for the officers. For example, his decision to go for burgers in the middle of the night seemed odd, and the whole trip also took him about 40 minutes, which was quite long considering that all the restaurants were close to his home. Nevertheless, officers inspected the fast food bag, and the food was still warm. The receipt contained the restaurant's address and the time of purchase, corroborating his account. Based on this, the police allowed Kevin to go to the hospital, but first, they had asked him to provide a blood sample. DNA analysis wasn't available at the time, but experts could compare the blood traces found at the crime scene with Kevin's blood type. When Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors confirmed that the wound on her head was not from a gunshot. Most likely, the assailant used a small but heavy object, like a piece of wood, and inflicted a series of blows. At the hospital, Diana slipped into a coma, and doctors worked tirelessly for several hours to save both the woman and her unborn child. They eventually managed to stabilize Diana's condition, but she still needed surgery. Meanwhile, investigators asked medical experts to determine if Diana had been sexually assaulted. Diana's position when found made officers consider this possibility. The experts later confirmed this, finding semen traces on her body. However, there were complications. Kevin had told detectives they were intimate a few hours before the argument, but DNA analysis was unavailable then. So despite having a biological sample from the perpetrator, little could be accomplished. Kevin and Diana's relatives spent the entire night at the hospital, hoping Diana and her baby could survive the attack. However, by morning, something unexpected happened. One of the monitors detected a sharp deterioration in the baby's condition, and despite the extensive efforts of the doctors, the baby didn't survive. As for Diana, medics performed surgery immediately after the baby's death, and her condition was stabilized. She remained in a coma, but her chances of survival were now considered high. However, Doctors didn't expect her to return to a normal life after such serious trauma. Detectives worked tirelessly to track down the perpetrator who attacked Diana. After her baby passed away, the case was classified as a homicide, and the local police department put all their resources into it. Despite Kevin providing an alibi, detectives didn't rush to rule him out as a suspect. His story raised numerous questions due to his argument with his wife, leaving the front door unlocked, and being absent for an extended period for a supposed quick trip to the fast food joint. His claim of seeing a suspicious man near the house in the middle of the night also seemed too convenient, but there was no evidence against Kevin. The police already had another suspect when crimes with a similar modus operandi had started happening in Tustin and its surrounding areas about a year before. In December 1978, an unknown perpetrator broke into the apartment of a 17-year-old girl, struck her with a piece of wood, and sexually assaulted her, resulting in her death. 4 months later, the same happened to a 21-year-old woman. Someone broke into her home, struck her with a piece of wood, and she didn't survive either. In July 1979, the unknown perpetrator entered another woman's apartment and did the same, but she managed to survive. However, the victim spent several weeks in a coma due to her injuries, and her subsequent testimony didn't lead detectives to finding the attacker. In September 1979, less than a month before Diana's attack, the same happened to a 31-year-old woman who died the next day. Her son provided investigators with a description of the assailant, but the man still couldn't be identified. All these crimes had important similarities, similar to the attack on Diana. Police were almost sure that they were dealing with a serial killer, and they were putting all their effort into catching this person. He had already been given a nickname, the bedroom basher, as the criminal was committing his crimes with short breaks and was active in a relatively small suburban area of Los Angeles. Detectives thought he might strike again soon, so they decided to use the media to warn all women who lived alone, especially those in lower-floor apartments, as they seemed to be the preferred targets of the suspected serial killer. This caused widespread panic. Women started buying any form of protection they could find, enrolling in self-defense classes, and staying with friends and family in an effort to protect themselves from the dangerous criminal. Police also started patrolling the streets at night. Detectives interviewed anyone who could have had any connection to these crimes, and soon they received their first leads. Several neighbors of the victims reported seeing a suspicious white man with dark, thick hair near their houses. Although this description was quite superficial, police located several matching men and investigated them, but it led nowhere. But there was a serious problem. Diana couldn't speak or remember anything, and according to the doctors, her brain needed some time to recover, functioning at the level of a 6-year-old child. Around the same time, another attack happened in Tustin. An unknown assailant broke into the apartment of a 24-year-old woman, struck her several times with a piece of wood, and sexually assaulted her. Tragically, the victim died, and the police once again failed to catch the culprit. Diana spent several more days in the hospital, and her mind began to gradually return to normal. However, she had almost completely lost her memory and still couldn't recall even her parents. Doctors said her memory might eventually return, but warned her family not to recount anything to her and to allow her to remember everything on her own. Once her life-threatening condition passed, Diana was discharged from the hospital, and her family took her home. Since Kevin needed to work on the military base to pay the bills, they moved in with Diana's parents, who could care for her around the clock. 2 weeks later, another tragic attack occurred in the city with a similar modus operandi, and this time, the unknown assailant killed a 17-year-old girl. After being discharged from the hospital, Diana started attending physiotherapy, and her condition gradually improved. She still couldn't speak or remember what happened to her, but everything suddenly changed 6 weeks after the attack. During a physiotherapy session, the therapist brought up the attack and asked if Diana still couldn't remember who did it to her. To the doctor's surprise, Diana suddenly nodded and pointed to her wedding ring. When Diana's mother came to pick her up, the doctor told her about this, and the mother asked her daughter, "Was it Kevin who attacked you?" And Diana nodded. Right after that, her mother took her to the police station, where she spoke with the lead detective. He asked Diana a few more questions, and she confirmed that she suddenly remembered the moment of the attack, and the perpetrator was none other than her husband. The detective's perception of the case took a sharp turn. Initially, he and his team were convinced that Diana fell victim to the notorious serial offender behind the other assaults. However, new uncertainties arose. Was Kevin the bedroom basher? Residing in the vicinity of the incidents and fitting the description given by multiple witnesses, a white man with dark hair raised suspicions. Alternatively, did Kevin plot to eliminate his wife by masquerading as the elusive assailant? Given the striking similarities in the bedroom basher's modus operandi in each instance, such a scheme wouldn't have been challenging. Investigators put Kevin under surveillance to closely monitor his movements in the hopes of linking him to other attacks. Police spoke with Kevin's friends to gather more information about him. They discovered that Kevin's relationship with Diana was strained, characterized by frequent arguments. This was further confirmed by neighbors who often heard them yelling. Kevin's friends mentioned that he complained to them about Diana's reluctance to be intimate during the final months of her pregnancy. However, when speaking to detectives, Kevin portrayed his relationship with Diana as nearly flawless. Besides that, detectives couldn't gather any additional useful information. Kevin behaved quite normally. He went to work and came back home without lingering anywhere else, and didn't raise any suspicions. The police received results from the lab showing and discovery. Along with the attacker's semen, they found skin particles with blood under Diana's nails. Specialists matched the attacker's blood type to Kevin's blood sample, confirming they were the same. This indicated that Kevin shared the same blood type as the person who attacked Diana. Based on this evidence, detectives formulated the most probable scenario of what occurred on that significant night. Kevin had indeed purchased burgers at a fast food establishment a few miles away from his home. The time on the receipt and the cashier's testimony verified his presence there. Consequently, the detective suspected that he might have assaulted Diana before leaving home, swiftly visited the fast food place to establish an alibi, thus explaining the prolonged 40-minute absence. Regarding motive, detectives theorized that Diana's refusal to engage in intimacy served as the trigger for Kevin's violent actions. Despite Kevin's claim that they had sex hours before the incident, he frequently complained to friends about Diana's reluctance for months. Given the severity of the attack, detectives believe this was Kevin's breaking point. The police re-interviewed Diana, who confirmed she vividly remembered the attack and that Kevin was the one who assaulted her. During the conversation, her mother said they could no longer pretend and live under the same roof as Kevin after that. Detectives decided to arrest him and proceed with legal action. Kevin was arrested at a store to protect Diana's family and to avoid arresting him at their home. He denied the accusations, claiming his innocence. The court preparation lasted 10 months, during which Diana's health improved, allowing her to speak again, though with some difficulty. Multiple doctors confirmed her recovery and deemed her a credible witness. Diana testified in court, confirming that the person who attacked her that night was indeed her husband. Kevin's defense insisted on his innocence, trying to use the fast food alibi, but it wasn't enough against the victim's testimony. In November 1980, Kevin was found guilty of killing his child and assaulting his wife. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Regarding Kevin's possible involvement in other murders and assaults, detectives noticed something interesting before his arrest. 2 more similar crimes occurred in their county, but both victims survived, and the attacker's identity remained unknown. However, after Kevin's arrest, the attacks suddenly stopped. Before that, the bedroom basher committed his crimes quite frequently, sometimes with only a few weeks between them. But once Kevin was arrested, there were no more similar crimes. After the sentencing, Diana filed for divorce, and Kevin didn't try to object. Diana continued to work on her recovery, but it was quite challenging considering the injuries she sustained. Her brain almost returned to normal, but some problems remained with her forever. She partially lost her hearing and vision and still struggled to speak. As for Kevin, he continued to insist on his innocence for years. His time in prison wasn't easy, as other inmates repeatedly attacked him for killing a child, and he ended up in the hospital multiple times. When he had the opportunity to apply for parole, the commission denied it, and over the following years, he received 3 more denials. The main reason for these decisions was that Kevin had never admitted his guilt, which was seen as a lack of remorse. Now, detectives had the opportunity not only to determine if one person was behind all these crimes, but also possibly to identify them. Kevin remained the prime suspect, but when experts obtained the DNA profile of the perpetrator and added it to the database, there was an unexpected twist. All these samples matched another man named Gerald Parker. Parker was arrested in the same year as Kevin. He assaulted a 13-year-old girl in Tustin and was caught shortly after. At the time, detectives did not link this crime to the series of attacks because they had a different pattern. While the bedroom basher targeted victims late at night in their apartments, Parker abducted the girl on the street. Since then, Parker has been serving his sentence in prison and was set to be released in just a few days. After investigators obtained DNA matches for Parker in all the unsolved cases, they also remembered the attack on Diana, although this crime was considered solved. Detectives still considered its connection to the other similar cases highly likely. Now they understood that Kevin definitely wasn't the serial killer, leaving them with just one question: did he really attack his wife? During those years, Parker served at the same military base as Kevin and also owned a dark-colored van. As we recall, on the very first day, Kevin told the police that he saw an African-American man in front of their house walking near a dark van. This made detectives wonder, what if Parker was behind the attack on Diana? The local prosecutor visited Kevin in prison and informed him of the progress in the investigation of the Bedroom Basher murder series. He then asked Kevin to provide a direct sample of his DNA for analysis. Kevin, who had been trying to do this for years, immediately agreed. While experts conducted the analysis, detectives went to see Parker in prison. At that point, they hadn't yet charged him with the series of attacks because they needed time to prepare such a complex case. Nevertheless, the police decided to talk to the suspect, hoping he might give them a confession. Parker began to deny his involvement in the series of crimes, so detectives shifted the conversation to the attack on Diana. Before questioning him, they reviewed Parker's case and found something interesting. After his arrest for assaulting the girl, he told the police that military service was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Detectives decided to use this to their advantage and questioned how he could let another soldier take the blame for his crime. They continued pressing Parker, appealing to his loyalty to the military, until he suddenly said that another person was indeed serving time for the murder he committed. He continued admitting that on that night, he did indeed drive to Kevin's house in his van. His plan was to roam the neighborhood, peering into ground floor windows as he had done many times before, looking for his next victim. But this time he heard screams from Kevin and Diana's apartment, and a man came out onto the street. Parker noticed that he didn't lock the door, waited for a few minutes, then entered the apartment and assaulted Diana. He also said that he didn't know her husband since they had different duties on the military base. Parker also confessed to the other crimes, admitting to 6 murders and 3 non-lethal attacks. After the police obtained his confessions, DNA results proved Parker's involvement and Kevin's innocence. The prosecutor promised to overturn his sentence as soon as possible, and a few days later, Kevin walked free after spending 16 years behind bars. The twist in this case caused a widespread outcry. It wasn't just because an innocent man spent nearly half his life in prison for someone else's crime. but also because it took so long for the police to establish the real killer's identity. However, that wasn't the last twist in this case. When Kevin was released, the state of California agreed to pay him $10,000, which was a relatively small amount of money, even for those times. Several years later, he got additional compensation of $100 for each day spent in prison, totaling $620,000. But the story didn't end there. Despite Kevin's full exoneration, Diana refused to believe in his innocence. Up until that point, she had claimed Kevin was the only one who attacked her. After biological data from her body matched Parker's DNA, Diana came up with a new version of the stories. She claimed that on the night in question, Kevin attacked and assaulted her before leaving, and then Parker entered the apartment and did the same to her. Parker himself repeatedly stated that when he entered the apartment, the woman was simply lying on the bed without any visible injuries or signs of distress. He also claimed that he was the one who struck her on the head. Diana's family proposed another theory, suggesting that Kevin might have asked Parker to commit the crime, which is why he left the house that night, leaving the door open. However, Parker continued to insist that he didn't know Kevin. There were numerous people on the military base, many of whom didn't know each other personally. Besides, such a version would imply that Kevin should have known Parker was the serial killer to ask him something like that, which he vehemently denied. Kevin also denied any connection with Parker, insisting he would never harm Diana, let alone their unborn daughter. He maintained that he left the door unlocked simply because he didn't want to return for the keys right after the argument with his wife. He also added that he still blames himself for that decision. Diana insists on her version of events to this day, and there could be a simple explanation for that. The trauma she endured as a result of the attack had a profound impact on her brain. When she emerged from the coma, doctors warned all her relatives not to tell her what had happened, as her brain could accept any information as true, and she would believe such memories to be accurate and real. It's worth noting that even at the time of Kevin's release, 16 years after the incident, she continued to experience serious difficulties, such as struggling to process fast speech, indicating that the consequences of the trauma had an irreparable impact on her brain. It cannot be ruled out that the trauma is the primary reason for her conviction of Kevin's involvement. As for Parker, in 1999 he was sentenced to death, but this sentence has never been carried out. After many years of waiting in prison, California imposed a moratorium on executions, so Parker continues to serve his sentence behind bars to this day. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coney. Marina Menegazzo, 21, and Maria Jose Coney, 22, embarked on a highly anticipated trip in 2016. Little did they know that this journey would turn into one of the most high-profile investigations in Latin America over the past decade. At the time, Maria Jose Coney was studying economics at the National University of Cuyo, while Marina Menegazzo was pursuing a degree in speech therapy at Aconcagua University. Both girls volunteered at an organization that supported people living on the streets. Those who knew them described the girls as cheerful and close to their families. The two friends, along with two others, set off on a journey on January 10th. After splitting up with their companions, Marina and Maria Jose continued on their own. Their route could be tracked through Maria Jose's Instagram posts. On January 13th, they were in Cusco, the former capital of the Inca Empire in Peru. The next day, an image was posted, also taken in Cusco. Another image was published on January 15th, showing the girls on a railway bridge near the Machu Picchu hydroelectric power plant. The ancient Inca city of Machu Picchu, known as the City Above the Clouds, is one of Peru's most famous attractions and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Based on their Instagram activity, it appears the girls spent several days in the area. On January 18th, Maria shared 2 more photos from her current location. The next day, January 19th, she bid farewell to Cusco by posting an image. By January 23rd, the girls had already arrived in Manta, Ecuador, where Maria posted a photo taken on Monita Beach. Over the next 10 days, they traveled along Ecuador's coast and then headed inland. On February 4th, Maria posted a photo from San Antonio, followed by one from Banos on February 6th. On February 10th, Maria shared a photo featuring all 4 girls, marking the end of their journey that began on January 10th. This farewell post came as 2 girls from the group prepared to return home to Argentina. Maria Jose Coni and Marina Manazzo still had around 10 days of vacation left, so they decided to take their time and revisit Montanita, where their Ecuadorian adventure had first begun. On February 22nd, Maria uploaded a photo of herself with Marina to her Instagram account, which was her last post. That same day, the girls informed their families in Argentina that they would be returning home soon. They outlined their travel plans, which involved taking a bus from Ecuador to Lima, Peru, where they would spend the night at a friend's house. From there, they would fly to Santiago, Chile on February 25th, and then take a bus to their hometown of Mendoza, Argentina. The girls also warned their relatives that they would have limited phone signal for a couple of days, making it difficult to contact them. However, as the days passed, their relatives were unable to reach them, and there was no activity on their social media accounts. This led to growing concern among their relatives. Marina's sister was the first to draw attention to this case on social media, posting a photo of 2 girls with a plea for help. The caption read, "My sister and her friend vanished on Monday 22nd in Montita, Ecuador. Please share this information." The families of the missing girls wanted to know if they had left the country and boarded their flight, but the airline refused to provide any information, stating they would only disclose this after receiving a court order. Furthermore, the friends with whom the girls had planned to spend the night before their departure reported that they never showed up. As a result, Marina and Maria's relatives contacted the emergency services in Ecuador to report the disappearance, and also reached out to the Argentine consulate for assistance. On February 27th, the consulate stepped in to help with the case. Argentina's authorities had sent fingerprints of both girls to Ecuador for a specific reason. Just a few days earlier, on February 25th, the body of an unknown woman was discovered in Montanita and taken to Gil. By comparing the fingerprints provided by the Argentine police with those of the unidentified body, it was determined that the body was that of Maria Jose Coni. On Saturday, February 27th, the police examined the area where Maria's body was found and discovered the body of Marina Manazzo just 43 yards away. Both bodies were wrapped in plastic bags and bound with duct tape. According to the Ecuadorian police, Marina's body was initially hidden from view by the perpetrator, who attempted to conceal it by placing an object on top of it. The autopsy revealed that Maria Jose died from blunt force trauma to the head, and she had genital injuries, a broken femur, and a broken toe. Additionally, marks on her wrists suggested that she was tied up. Marina Manazzo died from 6 stab wounds to the neck, and she also had marks on her wrists, indicating that she too was tied up. The reports concluded that the girls died on February 23rd. The toxicological analysis showed that their blood contained a large amount of a psychiatric medication, suggesting that they did not take the drug voluntarily and may not have even known they had consumed it. This implies that someone may have added the drug to their food or drinks. Only 24 hours after the second body was discovered, a major breakthrough in the case sparked a range of reactions from the girls' families, the president, and Ecuador's interior minister. The police had apprehended 33-year-old Alberto Segundo Mina Ponce and 39-year-old Aurelio Eduardo Rodriguez, who confessed to the crimes and recounted the events in detail. Bloodstains were found at Mina Ponce's residence, and Marina's mobile phone, backpack, and other belongings were discovered nearby. What was particularly striking, apart from the swift arrest, was the defendant's immediate confession. This development resonated with those following the case. According to their account, the men described exactly what had happened. Ecuador's Interior Minister, José Serrano, stated that the girls had left the hotel where they were staying on February 22nd at 2 p.m. after being robbed of all their money. They had planned to hitchhike to Lima, but this version was disputed by the hotel owner, who denied that anyone had stolen from the girls. The families of Maria and Marina also questioned this story, as the girls had credit cards with no activity recorded on them. It is possible that someone stole the cash and credit cards from the girls, but they still had access to their account funds, which they could have used to pay for things online, such as booking a trip. However, they did not do so. According to Ecuador's Minister of the Interior, the girls visited a bar and asked the owner for a couple of glasses of water because they were thirsty and had no money. The bar owner confirmed this, stating that she gave them water because they were penniless. Whether someone actually stole all of Maria and Marina's money remains unclear. The minister elaborated on the events, referencing the confessions of the suspects. According to Ponce, around 8 p.m. on that day, Rodriguez told him about two Argentine girls he had met at a bar. Ponce and Rodriguez approached the girls, Marina and Maria, and struck up a conversation. The girls claimed they were hitchhiking to Lima because they couldn't afford bus fare. However, this account raises several questions, as the girls had already purchased plane tickets from Lima to Santiago, Chile, and were due to depart on February 25th. Local police found witnesses who corroborated this version of events. The girls needed a place to stay for the night, but they lacked the money for a hotel or hostel. Ponce offered to let them spend the night at his house, and they accepted. A taxi driver confirmed that he had driven Marina, Maria, and Ponce to the house. According to the Ecuadorian authorities, Ponce then returned to the bar with Rodriguez, leaving Marina and Maria alone in the house. The heavily intoxicated men returned home around 2:30 a.m., but Maria and Marina were not there. The police investigation revealed that the girls had gone to a nearby store to buy soda, which was confirmed by the store cashier. According to Ponce's testimony, when the girls returned to the house, Ponce stayed in a room with Maria Coney, while Rodriguez was in another room with Marina Manago. Ponce wanted to persuade Maria to have intimate relations with him, but she resisted and tried to leave the house. Ponce then grabbed a stick and hit Maria on the head, causing her to die instantly. At the same moment, he heard a scream coming from the other room. When he entered the room, he saw that Rodriguez had killed Marina. Rodriguez immediately left the house afterwards. Ponce admitted that he then started thinking about how to dispose of the bodies. He attempted to remove all traces of evidence from the house and wrap the bodies in plastic bags using duct tape. In the afternoon, he borrowed a cart from an acquaintance and transported the bodies to a deserted area near the ocean shore, approximately 440 yards from his home. The authorities discovered several inconsistencies in the case. Despite the marks on the girls' wrists, there was no explanation. Furthermore, the toxicological analysis revealed that both girls had traces of a potent drug in their blood. The girls' families suspected a possible link to human trafficking and believed that the Ecuadorian authorities were involved in a cover-up. The families had several reasons to doubt the official story. Firstly, the girls had run out of money, yet they hadn't used their credit cards. Secondly, they were under the influence of drugs. Notably, the only witnesses who saw Maria and Marina that day were the ones who corroborated the authorities' version of events. It seemed strange that the bodies were found 2 days apart, only 43 yards from each other, in a town with just 5,000 residents. Additionally, it was peculiar that Maria and Marina sought help from Ponce and Rodriguez, given that there were many Argentine tourists in Monita, and it would have been more logical for the girls to approach someone from their own country for assistance. The brother of one of the victims reported seeing used syringes on the floor when the Ecuadorian police took him to the crime scene, but these syringes later vanished. and the experts who examined the area claimed they never existed. The family believes that the two accused men were just a diversion from a larger issue, possibly human trafficking. A second autopsy and new toxicology tests were scheduled by the authorities. It was also discovered that both defendants repeatedly altered their accounts of what happened. In one version, Mina Ponce denied involvement in the crime, stating that the perpetrator was a Venezuelan illegal substance dealer known as El Chamo, who lived in the area. The police arrested this man, but he claimed to have no connection to the incident and was willing to take a polygraph test or provide a DNA sample. Several DNA samples were recovered at the crime scene, including those from Mina Ponce and the two deceased girls. Additionally, there were multiple unidentified DNA samples that did not match Rodriguez, the alleged accomplice, nor El Chamo, who was cleared as a suspect following thorough DNA testing. The second autopsy, performed by Argentine experts, revealed that both girls were in a vulnerable state and unable to defend themselves prior to their deaths, indicating they were coerced into sexual activity. The autopsy also showed that Maria Jose had bruises and scratches exclusively on one side of her body, suggesting she may have been thrown from a moving vehicle. Furthermore, a new toxicology report confirmed that both girls had been drugged with a potent substance used in psychiatric treatment, which can suppress a person's will. Next, a reaction swept across Latin America. Sadly, a common phenomenon occurred. People placed the blame for their deaths on the girls themselves. Not only did ordinary internet users do this, but so did prominent public figures. One notable example is Maria Cristina Rivera, the Deputy Minister of Tourism for Ecuador. During the same period when news of Maria and Marina's deaths was circulating, Berlin hosted a tourism fair. Rivera gave an interview to a German news agency, but stating that the way the girls traveled made it inevitable that something bad would happen to them. She also commented that she had never visited Manita, as it didn't align with her social status. This was a disturbing case of victim blaming at the state level. Following Rivera's interview, the Ecuadorian government issued an apology to the families of Maria and Marina and terminated the woman's employment. The Argentine psychiatrist, Hugo Martin, faced intense criticism for his remarks, in which he referred to the girls as favorable victims and suggested that they somehow provoked others into committing crimes. Martin later claimed that his words had been misinterpreted, stating that he never intended to imply that criminals were not responsible for their actions. The trial, which began on August 8, 2016, was plagued by setbacks, including 3 changes in prosecutors, significantly delaying the process. Despite these challenges, the prosecution presented a substantial amount of evidence, including over 200 pieces of physical evidence from the crime scene and witness statements. The police had discovered some of the girls' personal belongings, biological fluids, and phones at the crime scene and in the adjacent house. Throughout the trial, Ponce maintained his innocence, claiming that his initial confession was made under police pressure. This assertion only fueled the suspicion of the girls' families, who believed that the Ecuadorian authorities were concealing information. Rodriguez, meanwhile, altered his testimony, implicating Colombian drug dealers in the girls' deaths. In the first week of the trial, the prosecutor revealed that additional individuals may have been involved, as the police had found 3 more male DNA samples at the scene, in addition to those of Rodriguez and Ponce. Ultimately, the court handed down the maximum sentence under Ecuadorian law, sentencing both Alberto Ponce and Eduardo Rodriguez to 40 years in prison. In November 2016, Ecuadorian authorities arrested José Luis Pérez Castro, a 34-year-old man, after finding his DNA at the crime scene. According to his defense, Castro had lived in the house a few weeks prior to the incident, and his blood was found on the wall due to a dental infection. The lawyers also claimed that Castro's DNA was found on the girls' bodies because he had touched furniture or objects that the police had also touched. However, Castro's defense began to fall apart when a dentist testified. It emerged that Castro had visited the dentist, but only 2 weeks after the discovery of Marina and Maria's bodies. Castro asked the dentist for a note confirming his dental infection, but the dentist refused, finding no health issues during the examination. The dentist ultimately kicked Castro out. José Luis Castro, like Alberto Ponce and Eduardo Rodriguez, was sentenced to 40 years in prison, despite maintaining his innocence until the end. The girls' families questioned the official account provided by the Ecuadorian authorities, even though the families had ensured that Argentine police officers were involved in the investigation. The Ecuadorian authorities' version of events has remained unchanged, and the search for other individuals whose DNA samples were found at the house is still ongoing to this day. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bobby Ann MacLeod. 18-year-old Bobby Ann MacLeod lived with her parents, Donna and Adrian, and her brother Lee in Plymouth, a lively coastal town in southwest England known for its rich history and maritime heritage. On November 20th, 2021, at around 5:45 p.m., Bobby Ann told her father she loved him and was going downtown to meet her boyfriend and friends. She left their home in the area of Lytham and walked to the nearest bus stop on Sheep Store Road, a route she knew well. However, hours later, her family realized she had vanished. They contacted the police, and a massive search began the next day, which ultimately led to a gruesome discovery. When it had been an hour and a half since Bobby Ann had left the house, her mother, Donna, texted her, asking if she was okay and if she had gotten to where she had planned to go. Without an answer, a worried Donna tried to call her daughter, but Bobby Ann wasn't answering her phone either, and that wasn't usual at all. It was another hour or so before Bobby Ann's boyfriend called her parents and asked if their daughter was home. He was worried because Bobby Ann hadn't shown up for their date, and all his attempts to contact her by phone had been unsuccessful. After exhausting all possible leads by contacting their daughter's friends, Bobby Ann's parents came to a disturbing realization. No one had any idea where she might be. This led them to fear the worst and prompted them to report her missing to the police. The police conducted an extensive search of the area on November 21st, with assistance from MacLeod's family and volunteers. To raise awareness, flyers bearing Bobby Ann's photo were distributed throughout the city, and her disappearance was publicized through social media and local news outlets. Police were aware that Bobby Ann was scheduled to take a bus downtown, so they quickly investigated and discovered that she hadn't boarded any bus. While questioning people in the area, the officers spoke with a local resident who claimed to have driven past the bus stop the previous evening and seen Bobby Ann waiting there. This suggested that she had made it to the bus stop but didn't get on the bus for some unknown reason. The local resident's account was soon confirmed when the police found Bobby Ann's wireless headphones in the walkway behind the bus stop. The bus stop area was sealed off, and police officers thoroughly searched the entire surrounding area on their hands and knees for any possible clues. They also searched for evidence along the route Bobby Ann would have taken from her home to the bus stop, as well as all nearby streets. Given that Bobby Ann was at the bus stop yet failed to board the bus, and her headphones were discovered nearby, along with several undisclosed details, the authorities started to suspect that she might have been kidnapped. They urged anyone with useful information to come forward and aid the investigation. A massive search operation was launched, involving a large number of officers who worked tirelessly to locate Bobby Ann as soon as possible. The investigators tried to track the location of her cell phone, which showed that it was still within the city limits, although they were unable to pinpoint the exact location. All calls made to Bobby Ann's number were directly sent to voicemail, and ultimately, the police managed to recover her phone on the same day. The bus driver on the route where Bobby Ann vanished from the bus stop handed over the phone and AirPods case to the police. A local resident had discovered these items at the bus stop the previous evening at 7:15 p.m. When the 7:23 p.m. bus arrived, the resident handed them to the driver, thinking the owner would come looking for them. After learning the next day that Bobby Ann was missing and had last been seen at the bus stop, the driver contacted the police and turned over the phone and AirPods case. On November 22nd, the day after Bobby Ann went missing, the police, her family, and volunteers thoroughly searched the fields, woodlands, and roads around her home, but unfortunately, they found no leads. The following evening, November 23rd, the police announced that a woman's body had been discovered at Bovasan Beach, roughly 8 miles from the bus stop where Bobby Ann was last seen. The body was found in a wooded area about half a mile inland from the shore. The subsequent identification process brought devastating news to the McLeod family. The body belonged to Bobby Ann. Her death sent shockwaves of grief through her family and friends. In the aftermath, the family expressed gratitude to all who attended the vigil held in Bobby Ann's memory near the bus stop where she was last seen. At the vigil, a tearful Donna McLeod, Bobby Ann's mother, paid heartfelt tribute to her daughter and thanked friends, family, and the wider community for their overwhelming support. On November 23rd, a 24-year-old man, Cody Ackland, walked into the downtown police station and confessed to kidnapping and murdering Bobby Ann, providing specific details about the crime. Ackland, the son of a former military man, had been living with his mother since his parents divorced. Following his confession, he was arrested as a suspect, and his lawyer released a statement in which Ackland took full responsibility for Bobby Ann's death, confirming that he was the one who abducted her from the bus stop. Investigators found 3,216 disturbing and dark images on Ackland's phone, similar to those seen in horror films. In the days leading up to Bobby Ann's death, Ackland researched serial killers online, including Joseph D'Angelo Jr., Andre Chikatilo, Ivan Milat, Fred West, and Tommy Sells. However, he focused most on Ted Bundy, who is estimated to have killed at least 30 people. On the day Bobby Ann was abducted, Ackland visited an online sports store, browsing baseball bats, ski masks, and waterproof clothing. Notably, despite his secretive interests, Cody Ackland had no prior record with the police and had never been in trouble with the law. It appears he took his secret hobby to the extreme, ultimately committing a serious crime. Bobby Ann arrived at the bus stop around 6:15 p.m. At that time, Ackland was driving his Ford Fiesta around the neighborhood and noticed her waiting at the stop. He claimed that Bobby Ann physically resembled his ex-girlfriend, but according to Ackland, this similarity was not what drove him to attack her. Rather, he was seeking a random victim to fulfill his long-standing plans. Upon spotting Bobby Ann, Ackland parked his car behind the bus stop, observing her for a few minutes to ensure they were alone. He then retrieved a pre-purchased hammer, snuck up to her, and struck her twice in the head. Believing she was dead, Ackland returned to his car, preparing to leave the scene. However, as he drove away, he saw Bobby Ann was still alive and attempting to get up. Ackland turned back, moved her semi-conscious body into his car, and drove her 20 miles to the Belvoir Forest parking lot in Dartmoor. At the parking lot, Ackland discovered that Bobby Ann was still alive and conscious. However, he callously failed to seek help or take her to the hospital. Instead, he brutally struck her 12 times on the head with a claw hammer in a futile attempt to destroy evidence. Ackland then burned her purse, still trying to conceal his crime. Ackland then callously loaded the body into the trunk of his car and drove nearly 30 miles to Bovasan, where he hid the body. The next day, Ackland drove to Tamerton Foley, north of Plymouth, and discarded the hammer into the River Tamar. He also threw away a carrier bag containing his and her blood-stained clothing into nearby allotments in Coombe Lane. Despite a thorough police search, the hammer was never recovered. On November 21st, Cody Ackland spent the day socializing with friends at a pizza place, attending his band's rehearsal, and hanging out at the pub until late at night. Those who saw him that day noticed he was in an unusually good mood, happy, joking, and even hugging his friends, which was uncharacteristic of him. The following day, November 22nd, Ackland continued to enjoy himself, buying popcorn and going to the movie theater while the police and volunteers searched for Bobby Ann. He also kept up with the latest news on his phone. On November 23rd, Ackland went to his job at a car service company, but took time off for his lunch break. He texted his mother, telling her how much he loved her. Afterwards, he went to the police station and confessed to the crime. Ackland's bandmates have issued a statement on Facebook announcing that the group Rakuta will disband immediately out of respect for the late Bobby Ann McLeod. Remaining members Josh Ross, Josh, and Mike are shocked and disbelieving about the tragic events of the past few days. Their thoughts and prayers are with Bobby Ann's family and friends who must be devastated by their loss. As a mark of respect, they have decided not to continue as a band. In addition to Ackland's confession, the police had significant physical evidence, including Bobby Ann's DNA found in Ackland's car and on sneakers recovered from his home. Detective Mike West, who led the investigation, reported that Ackland refused to provide a motive for the killing and avoided discussing why he did it. However, the detective did not rule out the possibility that Ackland might eventually provide more details about his actions in the future. Ackland told a psychiatrist that the depression he had experienced before killing Miss McLeod had lifted, and he no longer felt the same level of resentment as before, as if the violent act had somehow resolved those feelings. The trial took place in May 2022. Ackland's lawyer, Ray Tully, stated that psychiatrists concluded Ackland did not have a mental illness, but had faced difficulties in his childhood. Ackland had been diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, depression, and anxiety, and had experienced depression for 7 years by the age of 19. According to Mr. Tully, Ackland had received little comfort or support from his home or school life, and his father and other male role models had not provided much in the way of guidance or support. On sentencing, judge condemned Ackland's brutal act, declaring that he was convinced by the evidence that Ackland had deliberately set out to kill. The judge described the victim's experience as a prolonged and terrible ordeal, emphasizing that she had her whole life ahead of her until Ackland brutally ended it. He stated unequivocally that Ackland had planned and carried out the murder. Cody Ackland, age 24, received a life sentence with a minimum term of 31 years before he can apply for parole.